Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, the day we arrived at our Airbnb mountain retreat, I immediately sensed something was insidiously wrong, and it was a gut feeling that I just could not shake off. We were in a remote area surrounded by exquisite mountainous views of smoking blue statuesque mountains that rose up in the sky like imposing masterful pyramids, and the ever so delightful Swiss-style picturesque log cabin was flanked on one side by an exquisite forest of towering, majestic tall trees, and there was a silvery lake surrounded by a scattering of pretty evergreen Christmas trees, and its sparkling surface reflected the mountains and the trees like a shimmering mirror. This was the kind of view you would expect to find on the cover of a box of Swiss chocolates. So why, if I was surrounded by such idyllic, extraordinary beauty, did I feel this rising sense of foreboding and nausea that welled up in the back of my throat, with a very bitter aftertaste? I knew something was off, but I planted a positive smile on my face as I watched my husband remove our suitcases from the taxi cab and give the driver a very generous tip. And then we watched him driving away down the precarious, rather bumpy dirt road. "So what do you think?" said my husband, pulling out the large brass key from his pocket. "Would you like to do the honours?" he said, handing me the key. I turned the key in the lock and opened the door. The cabin was so resplendently decorated with exquisite oakwood furnishings and comfortable, superbly upholstered couches, not to mention a state-of-the-art modern kitchen where no expense has been spared. And then, of course, there was an incredible bedroom, and when I say incredible, I mean incredible. The bedroom was utterly enchanting, with its own wraparound porch and sliding glass doors that extended out onto an outside patio. You would step out onto a really gorgeous wooden deck, with steps that led down into the yard. This deck was adorned with high-quality outside furnishings that overlooked the sensational panoramic mountainous views. Then there was sumptuously attired king-size bed, which was smartly dressed with the finest layers of crisp Egyptian white cotton bedding that was extravagantly sprinkled with pretty pink and red rose petals, and there was, of course, a bottle of champagne on ice in a bucket, not to mention a white towel that was shaped into a swan. It was like we were really being welcomed. "It's so beautiful," I said to my husband as he opened the champagne and poured me a glass of bubbling champagne, and we clinked our glasses together. "Happy 5th anniversary," said my husband, kissing me affectionately. "Thank you for making me a very happy man and putting up with all my nonsense." "What nonsense?" I teased. "I don't know," he said. "I suppose I can be preoccupied with my work sometimes and not give you the attention you deserve." Suddenly we heard a woman's voice calling out, "Hello there!" "That must be our landlady," said Finn, as we went in the hallway to greet her. I noticed that our landlady was a buxom woman in her early 60s, with long white hair tied back together in a rather messy pigtail. She also possessed a rather exposed, sun-damaged skin and very pretty blue eyes. "Welcome to America," said the lady, "but everything is flat, so everyone just cycles absolutely everywhere." "I know all about Holland," said the woman, tapping the end of her nose. And then she whispered something to my husband in his ears and giggled and then retreated out of the cabin door and got back into her car and finally drove off. "What on earth did she say to you?" I asked, my husband curiously, that she clearly didn't want me to hear. "She said, 'I know all about the red light district, but your secret is safe with me.'" I gasped in horror. Is that what people think of Holland? That we're one big blazing red light district? That's horrifying. "Well, let's not kid," laughed my husband. "Cynthia is a little eccentric. One thing that perturbed me, though, is why would she say that we must not be worried about banging at night, because this is an old cabin, when clearly it's not. I would say that this cabin is very, very new. It's only been recently built. It's incredibly new." "Well, that's a bit extraordinary," I said. "It's a rather peculiar thing to say." Before long, Finn and I were settling down in the cabin, and we soon decided to retire to bed early that evening, as we were both feeling rather tired, and I decided to read the visitor's book to Finn. "Listen to this," I read to my husband. "This is from a lady called Eva Johansson from Sweden. I really loved my stay at the cabin, but I kept seeing a strange face staring at me through the window at night. I think it was a bear, and they can be very inquisitive. So do keep your curtains drawn, unless you want to get the fright of your life, which I did. Word of warning, the house can be incredibly noisy because of the old pipes. So my advice to all visitors, do not be alarmed by the noise. Otherwise, I really enjoyed my stay." "Wow," said my husband. "They keep going on about the old pipes banging, but that's absolute nonsense. This place is new. There are no old pipes." "Well, this is a comment from Carlotta Wagner from Austria," I continued. "Very beautiful log cabin. Thanks for great hospitality, Cynthia. Just wanted to say that noises at night did bother me rather a lot. Something big was walking around our cabin. I assumed it was the bear that you were telling me about, but it was making these horrible grunting sounds that were very unsettling. And I do believe this bear was possibly making the banging sounds as well. I don't necessarily believe it's old pipes, because I did check your pipes and they look rather new. You should warn your guests, because it was really quite scary, and even my husband was freaking out. And he does not scare that easily. Just a word of advice, that's all, but had a fabulous time. Thanks so very much." "Well, I'm not bothered about a bear loitering around the cabin at night," said my husband. "Are you?" "No," I said. "I rather like the idea of being visited by bears, although I do hope the critter will let us get some sleep. Listen to this, it's from Sasha Fisher, all the way from Germany. This is a quaint, charming, idyllic cabin, but there is something not right about this place. Sorry, Cynthia, but I had to say it. There is something menacing around your cabin that really made me feel distinctly unsettled. Maybe you should investigate the position of the cabin. Could it be built on an old Indian burial ground? I say that because there is something outer-worldly about this place, and during my stay I could never ever relax. I felt as if something was watching me. And in the woods, when my husband and I went walking, I believe we were being stalked. I always got the sense that something or someone didn't want us here. Also, as you pointed out, Cynthia, the old pipes in this place really give me the creeps and the heebie-jeebies. They made quite a lot of noise during the night, so it was very hard to get any sleep. Otherwise, a really enchanting cabin, and I did enjoy my stay. Many, many thanks." "Wow," I said. "Can you believe that? Is this Sasha lady suggesting that the place is haunted?" "Maybe," I said, "or why would she be talking about an Indian burial ground? Do you think she saw something supernatural?" "Very possible," said my husband, "although I've never been convinced by the supernatural myself. I've got to admit that as picture-perfect as this cabin is, there is definitely something airy about this place." I looked at my husband in shock. "I felt it too the moment we came here. It was as if something wasn't quite right," I said. "Well, we're here now," said my husband, "and the views are breathtaking. Let's just make the best of our time here. I'm sure it'll be fine." Our first night in our cabin was so peaceful that Finn and I slept in really, really late, and were absolutely amazed to discover that we awoke at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and so we decided to take it easy that day, and we thought we'd take a light afternoon walk in the woods, so that's exactly what we did. I must say the woods were quite enchanting, with towering mature trees consisting of sugar maples, American beech, eastern hemlock, yellow birch and northern red oak trees. And as we entered the forest we encountered some of the fattest-looking turkeys that I've ever seen, that had clearly never graced a Thanksgiving dinner plate before, and were not as jittery about our presence as you would have expected. Surprisingly, they didn't even scuttle away, but continued to peck at the ground very happily. I was pretty certain that no one ever hunted in these woods. We noticed some healthy-looking grouse, and the forest was literally full of the most captivating songbirds that sang the most delightful bird songs. We also encountered some rather timid white-tailed deer, but once again they did not scamper away when they saw us, but watched us very warily from a distance with a keen curiosity. As we ventured further in the woods, to our utter amazement, we encountered a very delightful pebbly stream that meandered through the woods with a furiously strong current. I immediately threw off my socks and shoes and paddled in the crisp clear water, and was eagerly joined by my husband Finn. Even though we're both adults, it's amazing how pebbly stream like this can rejuvenate and inspire childlike nostalgic memories, and the child in me came rising to the surface with an exuberant enthusiasm, my husband as well. We both sat on a rocky outcrop that jutted above the flowing stream, throwing pebbles and talking about all our experiences of 5 long years of marriage. Suddenly I was absolutely sure I had seen a silhouette of a very powerful-looking Indian warrior with a strong, broad, stoic-looking face, wearing a long flowing headdress of eagle's feathers, and it looked like it was embellished with beadwork and natural leather. I was certain I had seen him standing there staring at us, but then he vanished so fast I was almost certain that I had imagined it all. "Did you see that?" I asked my husband. "See what?" Finn asked. "Nothing," I said, thinking to myself that I was going stark raving mad. We decided to leave the forest, but suddenly we began to hear the very enchanting ethereal music again, that sounded ominously like a mixture of drums, rattles and flutes, and we could hear some rather strange, curious chanting. My husband looked at me, startled. "That sounds like Cherokee Indian music," he said to me in horror. "I thought that there was no one around here, but clearly I was wrong." "I thought I actually saw an Indian warrior earlier," I told him. I was almost certain he was staring at me. "Let's see if we can find the source of the music," said Finn. "There has to be a rational explanation for this." As my husband and I entered the heart of the forest, the music got louder and louder and louder, and then we stood at the edge of the clearing, and we clearly saw several American Indians wearing those beaded cotton tunics and Indian headdresses, and they appeared to be dancing around a crackling fire in a counterclockwise circle, with a woman following the men, and all appeared to be attired in traditional Cherokee attire. My husband and I watched this strange dance from behind the cover of a large maple tree and listened to the amazing ethereal music, and I was bopping my head up and down in time to the music and beaming brightly. "This is so lovely," I reflected. "I wonder where all these people came from." Suddenly the music dissipated as fast as smoke leaving a chimney in a furious windstorm. For a moment the figures seemed to go out of focus, rather like a hazy, blurred-looking photograph, and then they simply vanished before our eyes. My husband and I literally stared at the clearing with eyes growing as wide as saucers, hardly daring to believe what we had just observed. "Did you see that?" I said in horror. "They vanished before our very eyes, but they were here. You did see them, didn't you?" Finn, who normally never believed in the paranormal, was looking at me with a befuddled, disorientated expression on his face. He looked as if I had just thrown a glass of icy cold water at him. "That didn't just happen," he said. "Tell me I was just seeing things." My husband walked over to the area where we had observed the crackling fire, and all we could see was some smoky ash rising in the air like a fine white smoke. When we touched it, we discovered that it was as cold as ice. "Feel that?" said Finn. "It feels like an ice cube, and yet it's smoking like the embers of a dying fire." "This is nothing short of super weird," he said. "It's like we're in the Twilight Zone, or on an ambiguous reality with no rational explanation. I might understand an experience like this if we were hallucinating from magic mushrooms, but what we've just witnessed rarely transpired, and it's onerous to come to accept as reality because none of it makes any sense at all. This sort of stuff is meant for the movies, not for everyday life. What on earth just happened?" Our strange experience was so peculiarly odd, but my husband and I were so excited to have finally experienced something that was outer-worldly, But when you have an escapade like this, whatever your religious aspirations or orientation, you're certainly forced to conclude that energy does exist after death. Even Finn, who was a hardened cynic and a staunch atheist at the time, was forced to shift his perception of reality after he observed these Indians dancing in the woods, which was a struggle for him to even comprehend. That night when we returned to our cosy bed, we reflected on what we had seen, and before long we eventually fell fast asleep. I was awoken to the sound of banging pipes, and the rattling noise was so disturbing I was glad that Cynthia had warned us all about it, so that I wasn't so scared. The banging, pounding and hammering sound persisted for a long time, and yet Finn just remained fast asleep. He was dead to the world. He was always a deep sleeper, but sleeping through this disturbing noise seemed ridiculous to me. He must be really... I was not sure whether this critter was real or not. I know that sounds strange, but after having witnessed the apparitions of the Indians earlier, I was beginning to find it very difficult to distinguish between reality and fiction, what was real and what was not. I watched the creature gliding into the forest, and it looked like it was floating when it moved, which made me feel absolutely certain that I was observing a ghost of some kind. I do not know what overcame me, but I suddenly got this irrational urge to follow the critter. Cynthia had warned us about not venturing out at night, but maybe she knew about the paranormal occurrences in the wood and was terrified of scaring her guests half to death, because she didn't want such rumours to affect her bed and breakfast business, which was perfectly understandable in the circumstances. It was not something you would wish to advertise unless you were opening a haunted attraction, which was not the case in our circumstances. I grabbed a flashlight and followed the critter, but it had already disappeared into the wood, but I was no less determined to follow it. As I entered the wood, it was very, very airy, and it did not possess the same cheerful ambience that I had noticed earlier during the day. On the contrary, I could feel the silence of this dusky night, and it was so quiet that I could literally hear my own breath before my face. There were no sounds of the night at all that you would expect to hear, like the usual coyotes, owls, frogs and crickets, which was exceedingly unsettling for me. Suddenly breaking the ghostly silence was the sound of ominous galloping hooves that were thundering towards me with a jet energy and power of the Derby horse race. It was utterly terrifying to sense this formidable energy thrashing towards me with such a force. Before I had a chance to retreat from the woods, I was suddenly standing yards away from the Indian warrior that I had observed earlier in the day. But this time I saw him. He was seated on the back of a huge, magnificent-looking black stallion. If you'd not known any better, you would definitely have believed that he was physically real. But the way the warrior and his horse were lit up was, I can assure you, not normal by any strength of the imagination. It was not of this world. It was like they were both bathed in a glowing, sparkling, white, supernatural light, one that I've never been able to explain. I was so transfixed that my mouth hung open and my eyes grew as wide as saucers. In that moment I was so beguiled and bedazzled and amazed by what I was observing that my fear was suppressed by this heightened feeling of awe and wonder. Was I really seeing this, or was I hallucinating, I wondered. Finally the Indian warrior spoke, and his voice sounded like rushing water. It was powerful, imposing and commanding in its narration. "Sister," he said to me, "you need to leave this place now. This is the burial ground of the Tsal Kalu and all his descendants. He will be sending the winds of fire to burn down your cabin now. He has sounded the warnings to your kin on numerous occasions, but no one has heeded them. His patience has been lost, and his frustration risen to greatness. We cannot protect you if you do not heed my warning." Suddenly he turned around and galloped through the forest and was gone. I turned around and walked back towards the cabin, and that was when I saw the monstrous humanoid ape-like critter that I had followed into the forest in the first place. His back was now facing me, and he was only 100 yards ahead of me, moving stealthily towards the cabin, with a large piece of fiery timber in his huge hands. It was clear what this creature's motivation was. He was planning to burn down our cabin. I immediately ran as fast as I could to the far side of the cabin, and my anxiety levels literally hit the roof. I was shaking from terror and running like an inebriated drunk, as my fear had seemingly caused the wiring in my brain to disconnect with its physical pathways. I became clumsy and disorientated in my desperation to get to Finn in time, and this was hijacked by my ability to remain calm and composed. I was so alarmed because all I could think about was Finn and how I needed to wake him up now, because it was very clear that this creature wanted to burn down our cabin. The creature was heading towards the front side of the cabin and was lighting up the timber beams, which was absolutely amazing because wooden cabins tend to have much more fire resistance to normal homes. But our cabin was lighting up like a Christmas tree, and very fast. I ran around the back end of the cabin, up the steps of the wraparound porch, and rammed as hard as I could on the grass window pane, and I was shouting Finn's name. "Finn!" I screamed. "Finn! Finn! Wake up! Wake up now!" Suddenly I saw Finn staring at me through the glass pane of the sliding door, which pulled back slowly. He was yawning and wiping the sleep from his eyes. "What are you doing out there?" he asked in amazement. "And why do you look like a deer caught in headlights?" "We need to leave now," I screamed, grabbing the bag with our passport, phone and money. "The cabin is on fire." For a moment Finn looked a little muddled and confused, and so I pushed him towards the porch, very forcefully, and when he finally saw the fire that was engulfing the front side of the cabin, he literally sprinted with me towards the outer edges of the wood. We stood there in awe, watching the cabin engulfed in flames, burning down incredibly fast, and we immediately called Cynthia. "What is the heck going on?" asked Finn. "How on earth did the cabin catch on fire, and what were you doing outside?" "Finn," I said, "if I understood what was going on, I would tell you, but I cannot explain anything that has happened since we've been here. It's all very anomalous to me." Cynthia soon arrived. There she was, in her dressing gown and slippers, and struggling out of her car, and then she came bolting towards us. "Do you know what's happened?" she asked. I shook my head. I mean, how could I tell her about the strange humanoid ape that had lit up the cabin in flames? Cynthia was shaking her head aggressively. "I don't understand it," she said. "This is the 4th time this cabin has burnt to the ground. It keeps happening over and over again. Even the fire investigator doesn't know how these timber beams burn down so fast. It's all very odd. If I didn't know any better, I would think it was done on purpose, but the previous fires appear to have no sign of accelerant used, so something very bizarre is going on." I looked at Cynthia very kindly and took her lovingly in my arms to comfort her. I could tell she was terribly upset, and who could blame her? "Something tells me, Cynthia," I said, "that maybe you shouldn't build a cabin here. Every one of them seems to be burnt down. It seems to me that the earth is trying to tell you something. Perhaps it's not happy with it being here. Maybe it's sacred land." "Well, this was formerly a Cherokee Indian settlement," said Cynthia. "I'd never thought of the ground being sacred before, but it might explain some of the anomalies my guests have experienced in the cabins." Fast forward a few weeks. The good news was that Cynthia was able to transfer us to another cabin in a different area, so Finn and I got to enjoy the rest of our anniversary, but we did have to buy a brand new wardrobe of clothes, and we had a wonderful time in America. When I arrived back to Holland and researched some family history, I was amazed to discover that my great-great-grandfather was American Cherokee Indian. Looking back on everything that transpired, I think the apparition of the Cherokee Indian warrior knew I was of Cherokee lineage, which was why he was watching over me like a guardian of some kind, and was why he referred to me as sister. I was also to discover that the critter I observed was in fact a Bigfoot that the Cherokee call Tekali, which is another word for Cherokee devil. When I returned to Holland, I researched everything online, and living in this part of the world, I had naturally never heard of Bigfoot before, but I now know that that is what I saw that night. Naturally, at first I thought the critter was a ghost because he moved with such a seamless, flawless grace that he looked like he was literally floating. I think the reason the critter kept burning down all the log cabins that Cynthia invariably built was because she was building the cabins on the burial ground of the Cherokee devil's descendants, and I believe he didn't want a cabin built over the graves of his forefathers. I do realise, of course, how lucky Finn and I to be alive, because we could have been burnt to death in that cabin. What I'd like to say to your listeners is that I know my story may sound very far-fetched, spurious and fictitious, and I wouldn't blame you for doubting it at all, but I promise you it's true, and even though it happened in the year 2000, I want to assure you that 20 years on, I'm still trying to make sense of it all. I can only say that you experienced something outside the realms of your reality It's very hard to move away from your fixed perceived paradigm of the world. Even all these years later, I have to ask myself, did I really see that? Or was it my imagination? It's such a struggle to accept, and no one finds it a greater challenge to accept than Finn, of course, as you can imagine. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, for me, it began like any other day, that unbeknown to me would be the 9/11 of my own personal life, that would guide me down an unlikely, fantastical, implausible path that I never envisaged for myself. Who knew you could get up to embrace the normal routines of your day, only to discover your life would be thrown off its hinges like the wheels from a shopping trolley, that my life would literally veer off in a completely different trajectory as it spun out of control. If I did have any reservations about this ill-fated, inauspicious day that were not grandiloquently articulated in my thoughts with any sense of foreboding, there were no deep guttural nauseous feelings that accommodated me, like an old reluctant friend, as I ambled down the street with a bright sunny smile on my face, blindly oblivious of the horrors that were to come, like someone walking over an icy lake, not aware that parts of the ice on the lake have become treacherously thin, that one wrong move, you'll go sinking beneath its depths to meet an icy cold, watery grave. On this day I was smiling. Spring had arrived. It was my quintessential favourite time of the year. Even the clothes I was wearing today were lighter, reflecting my positive frame of mind. I had eagerly abandoned my heavy pink puffer jacket, my scarf and gloves that I'd worn every day for the last few months. Now I was wearing a pretty pink sundress with yellow flowers, shoestring straps, and flat golden sandals dappled with sequins and glitter. It was as if I was feeling as light as a feather, without all those claustrophobic extra layers weighing me down. My skin was just delightfully bathing, basking and wallowing in the toasty sunshine that was casting its warm, radiant shadows across the street, the familiar buildings, and the long grey ribbon of asphalt. It was a busy day in New York City, much like any other day of the week here. New York is always busy, a buzzing hive of activity, a thriving metropolis ablaze with enterprising pursuits as the Big Apple never surrenders to sleep, nor does she become subdued when the night is finally born. Indeed, she knows no distinction. The nights are active here like the day, with bright lights on buildings burning brightly through the night, thriving restaurants, bustling bars, and busy theatres. On this pleasant sunny morning, the yellow taxi cabs were rudely, rather rambunctiously, honking their horns. Crowds of people bounded off to work, scurrying down the streets, some hurried, others more complacent and relaxed. Coffee shops were heaving at the seams, with people bursting for that much-needed caffeine fix to fire up their human engines that needed that quintessential jump start. Indeed, on this particular day in early spring, there was a more pronounced skip to my step, as I soaked in the sunshine hungrily, ever grateful that winter was thankfully behind us. The Calorie pear trees at the Pulitzer Fountain at Grand Army Plaza in Manhattan were bursting with tiny snowdrop white blossoms, and the breathtakingly beautiful crabapple trees in Madison Square Park were ablaze with a confetti of pink that strangled their boughs in a dainty, delicate, magnanimous bounty of cloudy blossoms, while rhododendrons, azaleas and peonies were bursting with vibrant colours from pinks, crimsons to purples. I'd even observed that the cornelian cherries in Washington Square Park were covered with branches and clouds of mustard blossom, while Central Park and Riverside were exploding with carpets of red tulips, yellow daffodils and purple violets that sumptuously lined the walkways like the red carpets in an illustrious palace. I was walking to an apartment in the South Bronx, one of many in the area, a rather nondescript pedestrian square soulless high-rise building, with ugly windows and walls that were cracked and peeling, begging for general maintenance and a touch of white paint to wipe away its desolate forsaken look. The South Bronx by St. Anne's is still one of the poorest sections, with the highest asthma rates, due to the old smokestack incinerators that still exist. Let's just say between 149 and 3rd Avenue, West Chester and Jackson were crying out for housing improvements, as most of the dingy, rather grubby, insalubrious apartment buildings looked bedraggled, run down, sorrowful. As I ventured down one of these squalid run-down streets, with the address in my hands, I could smell the faint, decaying, putrid stench of garbage infusing the air, and there were black garbage bags untidily stacked up on skanky-looking park benches. The area was in a bad way. It really needed to be lifted out of its wearied melancholia. I noticed a couple of teenagers wearing overlong sweatshirts, jeans that were way too big for them, held up only by tiny belts, zooty trainers, and the bill of their rounded baseball hats facing their necks. They gave me a disapproving glare that sent a chill running down my spine. You always got some unsavoury, seedy characters in this area that lived along the benevolent, hard-working locals here, whom were scrimping to make a living, and made sure they double-bolted their doors every night. Make no mistake about it, this was a crime-ridden part of New York. I always felt troubled walking down those pitiful streets at night, which were often interrupted by ambulance sirens or police vehicles. I enjoyed my job as a social worker, but visiting some of these sleazy, impoverished areas had become a pretty common routine in my daily life. I had witnessed street fights and suspicious drug-dealing activity taking place in front of my eyes in the cold light of day. The smile evaporated from my face as I made my way up a flight of steps into a dingy-looking building where I was taken up several floors in a lift that stank of mould and mildew. It groaned, whimpered and squeaked as it grudgingly carried me up to the 8th floor with a resigned, rather wary reluctance. I walked down the long, unfriendly, frosty, neglected corridors, looking for apartment number 98. The bare-boned, downtrodden corridor is cold, unembellished, barren, very scruffy. Its floors are lined with unfussy, clinical-looking white tiles. Finally, I reached the shabby, scuffed door of apartment number 98. It's badly scratched. It looks like a creature with massive claws has been busting his gut to get into the apartment. I knock on the wooden panel and hear the sound of reluctant, light feet padding towards the door. "Who's there?" comes a voice from behind the door. I can hear the high-pitched anxiety in that voice. "It's Winona Friedman, the social worker. I'm here to see Sybil." The door creaks open. A skinny, emaciated-looking woman, wearing scruffy, faded jeans and a loose pink sweatshirt, stares at me through sunken, almost hollow sockets. She has one perfectly normal blue eye and another black eye, surrounded by unsightly bruising and swelling. This is a look I'm well acquainted with in my line of work when it comes to domestic violence. She's wearing a pair of pink fluffy slippers on her feet, and her long blonde hair is hanging loosely around her face in dishevelled ragtails. "Come in," she says, leading me towards a bedraggled black couch that sits in the corner of the room. It looks like it was recovered from the dump. And then there's a cracked, badly scratched coffee table with a cigarette tray bursting with hundreds of butts. There's a limp, threadbare, faded carpet lying across the floor, and a curled-up black and white cat eyeing me warily from the opposite chair. I imagine the poor cat has seen his fair share of drama in this place, and is possibly wondering if I'm going to invite some trouble into the apartment. I wish I could talk to him and assure him that that is not the case. I retrieve the file from the folder in my bag and begin to scribble some notes down. "So how are you coping, Sybil?" "As well as can be expected. How do you think I'm coping? My bloody husband almost strangled me to death." She pulls her sweatshirt down to show me the horizontal lines of the strangle marks on her neck. "Good job my son Owen came home in the nick of time. He managed to hit my husband on the back of the head with a frying pan. He was passed out for a couple of hours, but he finally came round. No son should have to see his mother being strangled like this. You were a very lucky lady. At least he's behind bars now. He can't harm you there." The woman pulls out a cigarette from her box. "Mind if I smoke? It calms me down." "Of course not," I say. I'm breathing in so much cigarette smoke in this room already. Her lighting up another cigarette isn't going to make a jot of difference. Either way, my lungs will be filled with the fumes. These days I live on my nerves, she says, trembling, as she lights up her cigarette. It's my husband's wretched brother Dowie, you see. Oh, I'm scared to death of him. I think he's going to come after me. He's absolutely furious with me for filing charges against my husband and getting him arrested and, of course, charged with attempted murder. I'm worried, rather worried he's going to strangle me. The man has no self-restraint. When he's angry, he's like an untamed tiger, dying to get his teeth into you to tear you apart. I've seen how he fights. Believe me, it's not pretty. Well, what did he expect would happen? This Dowie character, I mean. It's hardly your fault that his brother nearly strangled you to death. How could he possibly blame you for charging your husband? He nearly killed you. It sounds like your husband's brother Dowie is a liability, a time bomb waiting to go off. You don't want to hang around for a man like that. Would you like for me to organise for you to be relocated? It might be a good idea in the circumstances and can easily be arranged for you. Sybil sighs. She shakes her head vigorously. It won't make any difference at all. Dowie will find out my location. He's in a gang, you know. He's a nasty piece of work. These people, they have ways and means of finding out all your business. Eyes in the back of their head, you could say. We could put you in a safe house. I think it is something you should consider. I believe it would be in your best interests, especially with the threat of violence still looming over your head. No, it's fine. I don't want to live my life in hiding. I just can't live like that anymore. It's no way to live. How long has your husband been beating you up? I ask curiously. Forever and a day, says the young woman. He's broken ribs, my nose, everything. He's got one hell of a temper on him. Anything will set him off. The nurses at the hospital were begging for me to file charges way back then, but I couldn't do it. I was too scared of the repercussions. But this time he went way too far. He went so far, it's a miracle that I'm not actually dead. So this Dowie character, your husband's brother, have you told the police about him? Yes, I have. The trouble is they can't arrest him, can they? I mean, he hasn't done anything wrong yet. But they've warned him that if he lays a finger on me, he could be locked away for a very long time. Not that that's any deterrent. People like Dowie, they operate by their own rules. Strange name, Dowie. Hardly flattering to be called Dowie. You should have seen him when he was a little boy, laughed Sybil. He was so fat he could barely walk. My husband said he would eat anything, just like a garbage disposal. When he was 10 years old, he was over 300 pounds. He had an insatiable appetite on him back then. I gather his mother used to bolt the refrigerator to stop him from raiding it at night. Her grocery bill was through the roof. Sometimes Dowie would hang outside the dumpsters at bakeries and pilferage the containers to steal the day-old doughnuts. My husband said one day in a single sitting, his brother Dowie ate over 50 doughnuts. People at school bullied him for being overweight. Everyone started to call him Dowie. One day he lost the weight, got fit, and went and beat up everyone who had ever bullied him for being fat to extract his revenge, as he had a long memory. The victims of his grievous assault were too scared to lay any charges against him. One of the young men nearly died from the altercation. I gather he's got a permanent limp in his leg now. Dowie is worse than my husband, far more aggressive. I think the anger he had from being bullied as a child has festered and grown out of control. He loves beating people up to get out the heated rage that is boiling within him. He's a strong man, about 6 foot tall, lean, muscular. Everyone is terrified of him around here. You just know you can ill afford to make Dowie upset. Remind me never ever to tease anybody about their weight, I say jokingly. But seriously, I am very concerned about this Dowie character. If he is as unhinged as you say, I think you should consider the option of a safe house. I rarely do. I mean, if he is upset about his brother being in prison, you're the one he's likely to blame, which makes you a sitting duck for his physical wrath. It's kind of you, Winona, to show me such concern. I truly appreciate it. In truth, I'm settled in this apartment. I like it here. I really don't want to leave it. I carry pepper spray with me everywhere I go. so I'm sure I'll be absolutely fine. And I have a friend who's going to give me a stun gun. Look, I say, removing a card from my purse. This is the name of the counsellor I think you should contact. She's terribly good. Her name is Doreen White. I promise you her counselling has worked miracles on many of the victims of abuse that I've encountered and met over the years. I've seen them literally transform their lives. You could almost certainly do the same. You've been through a lot of trauma in your life, I understand. Your mother was abused by your father when you were a young girl, which is why you attracted an abusive relationship, as it's all you know. It's what you're comfortable with on an unconscious level. It's what's normal to you. By Jove, that's an incredibly good point you make. I never thought of that. When I was growing up, and I saw my dad beating up my mother so violently, sometimes he beat her so badly, I almost thought she was dead. I swore that I would never marry anyone like him, but I'm reliving my mother's nightmare life, like a duplicate carbon copy. I've actually become my mother. She glances at the card I've given her. You know what? I'm actually going to give this woman a call. I need to get out of this destructive cycle before I end up in another abusive relationship. I've been always attracting men who beat me up in my life, and that needs to change. I've had enough of being a punching bag. Good for you, I say, handing her my card. Those are my details. Give me a call if you ever need to chat about anything. I'll be visiting you in 4 weeks' time to see how you're getting on. Meanwhile, good luck. Thanks, Winona. I appreciate it. It's what I'm here for, I say. As I leave the apartment, I notice a rather unsavoury, seedy-looking character looking at me as he darts up the stairwell. He pounds aggressively with his fists on the door of an apartment a little further down the lobby. I'll never forget the scowl he gave me. If looks could kill, he was wearing that look. He was particularly unfriendly, as if in some way he had a personal vendetta against me, which I thought was peculiarly odd, as I didn't know him from Adam. I thought no more of the matter, until I'm walking down the sidewalk, reflecting over the poor victim of abuse I've just met, about how she'd been callously strangled by her husband, and I'm wondering why she refuses to go to a safe house, when suddenly 2 men run up to me and fling me violently to the ground. It happened so quickly. I'd heard the dashing feet thundering towards me like lightning. I fleetingly glanced over my shoulders to see what was happening, and the next thing I know, I am thrown forcefully to my feet by a pair of powerful, impetuous arms that know no compassion or mercy. I hit the ground with a bang and find myself becoming personally acquainted with the granular grey asphalt pavement lying beneath my head. The foul stench of garbage permeates the air, and the incandescent brown eyes of a man stare into my blue ones with a vengeful hatred. I'm so startled. I cry out, "Take my purse! Take my money! You can have it all! Take anything you want! But please, please don't hurt me! Please, please don't! You can have everything! You can have all my money!" Then I see the blade of a very sharp knife slicing through my shoulders. "Kill her, Dowie," I hear the other lad saying. "You don't want the police connecting her to Sybil. Finish her off right now." I remember the knife piercing me as it stabbed me. It was like an aching sensation which caused me to pass out at once. I was to learn later that the man had pierced my lung. I can hear police sirens, men's feet running away from me, an ambulance siren. Everything blacks out. I remember no more. At one stage I recall a couple of men in blue hovering over me, like seagulls over an ocean rock. They seemed distant, so far, far away. They were calling out my name, but they were so obscure, so faint. They seemed all but just a part of a very surreal but bad dream. I was to wake up in the hospital room a couple of days later, wondering where on earth I was. But the traumatizing memories came flooding back, and then I remember a man called Dowie being told to finish me off. So he was arrested and put into prison for attempted murder. I was relieved he was now safely behind bars. The trouble was that the post-traumatic stress affected me gravely after the street-side drama, which had birthed in me a dreadful, discomposing fear. After that tumultuous, life-altering event, where I was moments away from bleeding to death, My life as a social worker was put on the back burner. I was suffering from panic attacks and hot sweats, along with lots and lots of nightmares. The counsellor I had sent so many people to myself, Doreen White, became my personal counsellor. It was her wise suggestion that I left New York for a couple of weeks for a much-needed break. "Why don't you go to Alberta in Canada?" she told me. "If you must know, I have a friend there who has a cabin, which has an internet connection, so you can have counselling sessions online with me. But I think an escape to the country is exactly what you need to aid your recovery. There's nothing like fresh air, beautiful views and mountain scenery to put everything into perspective for you. You definitely need a break from New York. You see, your memories of your assault are entrenched in this place. Getting away somewhere new will be very healing for you." "You really think it'll help?" I asked, looking at Doreen sceptically. "If I can't find peace here in New York, what makes you think I'll find it anywhere else? I take walks in Central Park every day, and it feels good, I admit that. But when I return home, I'm still in a dreadful state. I'm always looking over my shoulders, wondering if someone is going to pounce on me with a knife. Look, you've had a terrible shock, Winona. But what happened to you was rare. The chances of it happening to you again is very unlikely. Lightning rarely ever strikes in the same place twice. Yes, if you must know, I don't only think going away will do you good, but I think it's a prerequisite for your healing. Many of my clients have gone off to magnificent parts of the world and returned to my counselling sessions renewed with a whole new appreciation of life. Nature is a powerful tool, you know, for your own self-healing. Helps you gain perspective, to see your troubles in a different, whole new light. View them through a different lens, if you like. I knew that Doreen White knew exactly what she was talking about. She was a highly skilled, very professional therapist, so if she believed a stint in the countryside on my own with nature would be what I needed to heal some of my anxiety issues, who was I to challenge her professional opinion? Of course I had my grievous doubts. Everywhere I went in New York, I was glancing over my shoulder, expecting someone to run out of the dark shadows, throw me onto the ground with a violent thrust, and fiercely severing my flesh with a very, very sharp blade. I was constantly having panic attacks, where I would retreat into a corner and blow into a brown bag to calm myself down, as my heart would pound violently in my ears, and I would begin to hyperventilate. I could never get the tormenting, haunting image out of my head of being pounced on by two powerful, puissant men, and the sparkling glint of a silver blade being viciously thrust into my shoulders. I recall how my world faded, dimmed, darkened, as I drifted into an insentient, comatose oblivion, where I knew no time or space, and that helpless, feeble, impotent feeling that overcame me, where I just buckled under the hands of fate, like a trampled flower in the meadow. It happened so swiftly. I didn't have any time to even think, is this it? Am I going to die? It all happened at lightning speed, and the aftermath was far more brutal than the attack itself, as the terror of that day kept replaying in my mind over and over and over again. I was to discover that Doe had attacked me as I was visiting his brother's wife, Sybil, and if he couldn't extract revenge on her, as the police would know it was him who was responsible for the attack, so he'd be arrested, so why not hurt one of her friends instead, in order to hurt her indirectly? What he didn't know was that the day I went to visit Sybil was for the very first time, and I wasn't even acquainted with her in any way. On the subject of Sybil, who I hadn't seen for a while, it was ironic that the day before I was due to go to Alberta, Sybil visited me serendipitously at my home. She wanted to apologise profusely for everything that had happened to me on her account. I noticed she was looking so much better than when I'd last seen her. For a start, she'd given up smoking, which was miraculous in itself, as when I visited her in her apartment, she was so nervous she was shaking like a leaf and smoking like a chimney. I barely recognised her. She seemed calmer, at peace with herself. She looked pretty, her blonde hair glossy and healthy, her cheeks fuller and more radiant, her body less emaciated, so much less sunken. She looked great. "I had to come and see you," she told me. "I can't believe Doe attacked you. What a complete loser. I gather hurting you was his clever way of indirectly getting at me. He thought that way the police would never connect the dots. Anyway, it's a good job those two are finally behind bars. I wanted to apologise. As if it wasn't for me, you would never have been stabbed in the first place, and you could have so easily died. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say. It's probably a case of being at the wrong place at the wrong time, I said. It was just rotten bad luck that Dowie was visiting a friend's apartment close to yours when he saw me leaving your place, so in that moment he decided to attack me. That's life for you. When bad things happen to people, it's more often than not bad timing, but you're not to blame. You mustn't blame yourself at all. Dowie is entirely responsible for what he did to me. Where are you going? Asked Sybil, glancing at my suitcase in surprise. You're not leaving New York for good, are you? Because of what Dowie did to you? Please don't say you are. I know it's presumptuous of me, but I was so hoping we could become friends. You were right about Doreen White. For the first time in my life, she's helped me to examine myself and to change my behaviours, and it's worked like a charm on me. I'm going out with a new boy who actually treats me right, instead of finding myself drawn towards abusive relationships where I get beaten up and kicked around like an animal. It's frightening how I was becoming my mother. I mean, I'd watched her live with my father's battery and abuse, swearing to myself that would never ever be me. But I was repeating the same old cycle again, of being abused just like she was. It's nonsensical. Good for you. I'm so glad for you, I say. You've recognised the tangles of your life and are breaking free from them. In a strange way, I've got entangled in issues as a result of Dowie's attack on me. I'm going to Alberta, if you must know, at the request of Doreen White. She has a friend who has a cabin there, and she thinks I need to spend about 3 weeks there. You're kidding me, says Sybil. You know how much I've wanted to go to Alberta. It's magnificent over there. She pauses for a moment. Who are you going with? Have you got a boyfriend? Are you going with him? I'm going on my own, to help me with my anxiety issues, by getting close to the natural world. And no, I'm not dating at the moment. I'm too screwed up at the moment to get involved with anyone, that's for sure. Can't I come with you? Asked Sybil impulsively. My son's away at my sister's place, and I've always wanted to go to Canada. Doreen might be right about many things, but she's not right about this. It's much more fun to go on holiday with someone than being on your own. Can you imagine it? We could go on hikes and picnics together, explore the fabulous alpine scenery, visit Lake Louise and Banff. Why not, I say? You're right. I'd prefer not to go alone. You're welcome to come with me if you want to. I think I would really appreciate the company. Sybil gives me a huge hug, and the rest is history. Off we went to stay in a little mountain cabin, not far from the glorious mountain town of Banff. The quaint wooden cabin was made from very old timber beams that I was told were over 100 years old. It was situated not far from the resort town of Banff, in the province of Alberta, located in Banff National Park, with the peaks of Mount Rundle and Mount Cascade, part of the Rocky Mountains that so commandingly dominate the skyline here, with their masterful jagged contours pirouetting above the small town. The prepossessing charming town, with its fabulous alpine scenery, is postcard perfect and enchanting. Banff is known for its surreally coloured lakes, and of course the prominent stately majestic mountains that capture the very heartbeat of this town. Let's just say when I fixed my eyes on the mesmerising views of this ravishing landscape, I knew exactly why Doreen White had sent me here to Banff. I found my anxiety melting away like butter on a hot bagel, as my attention was directed away from myself, and all the issues that plagued me since my attack I wasn't thinking about, because I wasn't thinking about myself. Instead, I was bathing in the awesome mountain views, like I was wallowing in a luxurious hot spring, and drinking the scenery, like savouring the sweetness of a double-thick chocolate malt milkshake, gliding down my throat with a thick, creamy sumptuousness. It would seem that me and Sybil were equally as transfixed by Alberta and its carefree, easygoing, relaxed way of life. We were New York girls through and through, so Banff was a world away from what we'd ever known. I was used to the buzz of a big, colourful, trendy city, The yellow taxi cabs meandering down the streets, the hustle and bustle of people rushing off to work, the occasional street drama on the sidewalk unfolding before a bemused public when two people got into a steamy, unseemly altercation and the police were called to ferry them away. The smell of a street vendor cooking chicken kebabs on the sidewalk, and the aroma of coffee permeating the air from one of the coffee shops. Of course, New York was vibrant and happening, but this place, it was so different. It was like Banff nestled beneath the lofty baronial mountains, basked in the light of a brand new morning, with a sparkling tranquility and such a serene energy that wafted over the town like a fragrant bouquet. And when you breathed in that fresh air, the fast pace of your heartbeat would slow down, and you would find yourself washed in the tidal wave of reassurance and safety, as if the mellow environment itself was hugging you in its powerful arms and whispering, "You're safe now. You're safe now. No one can hurt you." Sybil, who was used to chaos and disorder, living in the South Bronx, with the smell of fruity garbage festering on park benches and shady characters wandering down sidewalks, looking as if they're doing drug deals on the corner, as they whisper to people in passing trucks, looking furtively over their shoulders to check that no one is watching and no police are coming. Let's just say for her, Banff was like heaven itself. "I never imagined a place this beautiful could even exist," she said, the tears spilling down her cheeks. "It's so gorgeous here. Thank you so much, Winona, for letting me come here with you." I had hired a truck for our stay in Banff, so we could drive around the idyllic countryside, visit all the sights, explore the mountain trails, go out to restaurants in town, and thoroughly enjoy shopping in some of those souvenir shops. I began to realise that having Sybil around made the experience so much richer for me. It helped that we were fast becoming great friends, as our commonality in both having experienced trauma in our lives created an unlikely bond between the two of us. The enchanting wooden cabin where we were staying was rather tiny, dwarfed by the spectacular mountain views that would probably make anything look rather inconspicuous. The cabin was nestled in a small flowery meadow. Both sides of the cabin was flanked by a resplendent woodland oasis, filled with hiking trails, where the vertical, velvety alpine trees injected the scenery with their vibrant splashes of green. The cabin looked like it had been snuggled comfortably there in the flowery meadow for hundreds of years. It belonged to the landscape as much as the velvety trees and the transfixing mountain views, almost as if it had been sprouted itself through the ground like one of the trees in the valley. I was very impressed with the layout of this fully furnished cabin, as it was so cosy, with one chalet-style well-proportioned main room, with a huge imposing fireplace, serenaded by a couple of swanky but cosy couches, bookshelves filled with interesting books to read, and a large coffee table with a central bowl filled with pine cones that had been sprayed and painted gold. There was one main bedroom, adorned with the most fabulously comfortable bed linen, and a bathroom. There was also a tiny but very well-appointed kitchen, a small wraparound porch that hugged the front of the cabin, and to its rear there were huge piles of perfectly chopped firewood, covered with a plastic tarp to keep them dry. One day me and Sybil decided to go exploring the wood grove that was on the right-hand side of the cabin, as the one on the left-hand side rose up on an elevated, high-rise, hilly incline, whereas on the right-hand side it was so much less treacherous, with flatter, open footpaths and magnanimous trails. And given that we weren't exactly fit, this was an infinitely better option for us. It was a magnificent sunny day, not too hot, not too cold. The temperature was absolutely perfect. We ventured out into the rich verdant landscape that seemed to hug us warmly as we neared our approach. It was surrounded by this tranquil oasis of trees, clustered together in congenial groups, like hundreds of people closely tucked alongside each other in a sports stadium. The sprawling, lofty canopy above our heads offered us occasional pretty glimpses of a blue sky or a bird soaring above us. Let's just say the subtle but subdued ethereal lighting effects in the woods was rather bewitching. Its twinkling light caressed the scenery in rainbow-like prisms similar to what you might get on a mirror ball at a disco. We had been walking for quite a while in the woodgrove, in a vertical trajectory, although the path curved to the left. Our feet pressed needles and twigs under our rubber boots. The forest smelt richly of pine. We could hear the birds tweeting, the sound of a nearby stream, as fast-moving water crashed, whacked, clobbered and thundered forcefully against the rocks. We observed several squirrels darting up the trees, watching us curiously through sparkling, inquisitive brown eyes. They actually made us laugh, they were so comical. On our trip through the trees, we noticed some long dark hair snagged on some thorny briars, which was surprising. The hair was more like human hair than animal hair. "This doesn't make any sense," says Sybil, fingering the long dark hair in her fingers. "What animal has human hair?" "It's not animal hair," I tell her. "It must be human." "But how do you explain that?" Sybil insists. "If it is human hair, number one, the human, whoever they are, was clearly having a passionate affair with this bramble bush, and now is possibly running around Banff, bald. That's a lot of hair for them to lose." I shrug my shoulder, nonchalant, admitting that the peculiarity does seem enigmatic. We also discovered the most massive footprint in the ground, that we decided had to be that of a bear, but it seemed like the feet had toes, which was nonsensical to us. "It's definitely a bear," I tell Sybil, sounding like the expert. "There is no way humans have feet that big. Besides, you wouldn't get a human padding around the woods without shoes, would you?" "But it's got human toes," said Sybil, looking nonplussed. "Bears don't have human toes." We found ourselves gravitating towards the stream. It was a sight to behold, as the rushing water that knew no reticence or wavering doubt thundered through the valley, as it beat against the rounded, colourful display of rocks that jutted angrily through the water, which whipped so powerfully, like a rotary beater on full throttle, so the water bubbled with a white foam. We noticed several weeping willow trees, all contorted and disfigured, their feather-boa-like boughs gracefully caressing the surface of the water, that twinkled with a reflectant silvery light. Sybil began to point out all the nooks and crannies in a large crooked trunk of a huge hunched-up weeping willow. It was buckled over the water at a particularly peculiar angle, rather like a monk arched over in prayer. The side of its trunk was bespeckled with sizable little hollows, an inscrutable novelty I would easily have overlooked or omitted to detect myself. We both studied the trunk curiously, marvelling at the way it twisted and curled, like an artful piece of sculpture. Sybil examined one of the hollows in the tree, fiddling around it with her fingertips and pulling out a pretty stone. "Look what I found," she says, gasping. "I wonder if these gold flecks on this stone are real gold." She fumbles the stone between excited fingers, examining it closely. It was certainly an idiosyncratic river stone, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It glittered with gold, silver, blue and purple specks. We began to probe into all the other nooks and crannies, and sure enough, it was like an Aladdin's cave of unusual, extraordinary-looking river stones. One stone that was not a river stone at all, but an aquamarine colour, the colour of Lake Louise. It looked like something you would find in an extravagant ring or necklace at an expensive jeweller's. We were particularly thrilled with our rather eccentric discovery, for this was a stone collection that was particularly beautiful, but the aquamarine stone was extraordinary. We wondered what it could be. We put the stones into my shoulder bag and retreated through the forest. All of a sudden, I'm stung with the uncomfortable prickling sensation that I'm being watched, and the anxiety I thought I'd left behind me in New York came bounding back like a rambunctious, out-of-control dog. "Something's watching us," I say to Sybil, looking at her with rounded, terrified eyes. Sybil laughs at me, but I notice there's a nervousness in her eyes, but she tries to clandestinely shield it from me, and even her elevated voice sounds rather unnerved. "Don't be silly," she says. "You're imagining things, but let's get back to the cabin quickly, shall we?" We speedily hasten our footsteps to a fast walk. I can see Sybil is trembling. Her eyes look rounded. She keeps glancing furtively over her shoulders. Her face has grown as white as a sheet. What she hadn't told me was she'd seen a very scary, dark face, peering at us from behind a tree, at 8 foot off the ground. But she knew with my anxiety issues, telling me something so horrifying would possibly make me stall, like a car with a dodgy engine that refuses to start. She knew that my fear would not exactly accommodate our need to evacuate the woodgrove quickly. We make our way through the woods. My whole body is burning with trepidation and angst. Not only do I know something is watching us, but I sensed we were being followed, and I know I didn't imagine that. When me and Sybil move forwards, something is walking behind us. I can distinctly hear bracken, twigs being crunched, snapped and pulverized beneath ponderous feet. But when we stop, so do they. I stand very still for a moment, glancing over my shoulders to examine the foliage and the trees. But although I sense we're being followed, I see absolutely nothing. But in my gut, I am in no doubt that something is out there, and whatever in God's name it is very, very big. "Hurry up," says Sybil, who's not exactly acting like someone who moments before was telling me I was being ridiculous for spuriously believing something was watching us. When we get back to the cabin, I begin to feel rather silly. Of course there was nothing there. Sybil is silent for a long while, and I know something is irking her. But she guards her tongue fiercely, and I notice she bolts the door behind us, something she hasn't done before. It is during the late witching hours of the night when I awake with a violent start. I immediately shake Sybil wide awake, who sits up bolt upright in bed. "What's wrong?" she asks, looking at my aghast expression. "There's someone out there. Listen." We both listen intently, neither of us daring to say a single word, our ears pricked up like two alert dogs. We can hear this long stream of strange conversation that is occurring outside the cabin door. "Umukabasha, abon abgodabot abaka. No, hoi, unabe. Bloody hell," I whisper to Sybil. "Who can be out there at this time of night, in a remote spot outside of our cabin? This is nonsensical. This is crazy. What's going on?" We continue to listen, and occasionally hear words being spoken in a language we don't understand and can't comprehend. It sounds like foreign tourists that are visiting Banff are having a tete-a-tete outside our cabin door. As you can imagine, this is more than a little bizarre, but the language we do not recognize. The people are talking backwards and forwards. Thankfully, after a while, the voices begin to die down, and everything becomes quiet and pleasingly still. Sybil and I begin to relax, when our peace is ungracefully interrupted and disturbed by the bodeful, loud banging at the front door, and it scares us so much I'm almost beginning to hyperventilate. "Don't answer," I say. "Something's out there. Something's out there. I don't know what it is, but there's something there at the door." The banging continues at the front door like something out of the most despicable horror movie. Sybil and I are so terrified. We're huddling up closely together for dear life, clinging onto each other tightly, not knowing what we should do, or whether we should actually call for help. We hear the strange voices again. "Umoppa, abiole, ngobale, opiet awne. Then the knocking and the strange talking stops as suddenly as it started. We finally return to our beds to enjoy a very good night's sleep, although how we did that, given our level of trepidation, I don't honestly know. But perhaps we surrendered to our exhaustion. It is amazing how in the early light of the new morning, we almost felt ridiculously silly about how we'd overreacted the previous night, when in reality, the voices and the banging had been exceedingly discomposing. But it would seem the bright, warm, radiant light of the day can put things in perspective for you, and make what you were afraid of the previous night fade into the background, becoming inconspicuous and obscure, as if it hadn't really happened at all. Sybil had assured me that wooded areas can be a haven for paranormal activity and strange, unfathomable things that cannot be explained. Maybe that was what had happened to us the previous night, I thought. In a peculiar way, such revelations brought me a measure of solace. Maybe the forest was haunted. Provided we didn't venture out of the cabin at night, we should be perfectly fine, I thought. Later on in the morning we amble outside our cabin, walking towards the car. We were planning to visit Lake Louise that morning, and are in the process of packing the trunk with the picnic we had prepared. All of a sudden 3 ambiguous hair-covered humanoid creatures came gliding towards us. In a trice, me and Sybil find ourselves standing 3 feet away from a family of Bigfoot. We are from New York. The fables of country folk, like the hairy man of the forest known as Bigfoot, were nothing more than mythical, fictitious stories made up by the elders in indigenous families that had no bearing on the truth whatsoever, but were designed to scare, titillate, and intrigue. But now a fable has become a reality. I'm not exactly sure what Sybil is thinking in this poignant, indelible moment, but she's gawking in astonishment at the Bigfoot family. If her eyes got any bigger, they might actually fall off her face, like a pair of loose button eyes on a teddy bear. She looks as if someone has hit her hard across the head, and she's coming around from a raving, wild delirium. For me personally, I'm sure that this is a hallucinatory, lucid dream, as if my eyes have been somehow tricked, and I'm not seeing what I'm actually seeing. The Herculean-sized lofty creatures seem to accept our level of astonishment. They stand their ground, without saying a single word, while we begin to assimilate what we're actually beholding, as we adjust to the temperature of this outrageously remarkable experience. The Bigfoot male is the most impressive member of the family. He stands up tall at about 9 foot, and is about 800 pounds, and his body so powerfully built, like a forklift truck or a heavy piece of robust machinery. The female is dwarfed by him quite considerably, standing up at about 6 foot tall. She almost looks fragile in contrast to him, although, believe me, there is nothing delicate about this creature. While the youngster towers at about 8 foot tall, and even though he's the same height as his father, maybe a tiny bit shorter. I know it's crazy, but I knew at once he was the youngster in the family. He was thin and willowy, without his father's gargantuan proportions, rather like an ungainly, gawky teenager who hasn't filled out or grown into his body yet. The creatures all have overlong arms like a primate, cone-shaped heads, and human-like faces with high cheekbones, prominent, heavily furrowed foreheads, leathery grey skin, hooded deep-set eyes of a golden-brown colour. Their bodies are covered with long flowing hair. They smelt woody, like the pine of the forest, not like the pungently offensive odorous smells some claim to have encountered when crossing the path of a Bigfoot. It does make me wonder if these creatures have the power to leave a skunk-like smell behind them as a defensive mechanism for the sole purpose of scaring people away. That would make a whole lot of sense to me. You would think I'd be terrified, especially as I'm predisposed towards panic attacks after being attacked so forcefully by Dowie and his dreadful friend. Yet on this pleasantly sunny day, with the sun smiling warmly down upon me, and the fresh air brushing my skin with little nudges, fear does not even entertain my thoughts, that seesaw from intrigue to abject astonishment. The idiosyncratic creatures were benevolent, with incredibly kind eyes. I sensed that approaching us was not something that had come easily to them. They were naturally reticent, self-effacing, rather bashful by nature, but they seemed troubled by something, and were eager to share their trouble with us. Whatever it was, I hoped we could be of help to them. The younger Bigfoot looked the most unsettled of all, as he seemed to be nervously twitching, like a large Rottweiler terrified of a teacup Yorkie. The male creature begins to talk to us in the strange language that I do not understand. He's pointing at his son, who's looking at us with eager, expectant eyes, as if we somehow are the answer to all his problems, while the female is nodding, as if in thorough agreement with whatever the large male is telling us. The male Bigfoot shows me a stone with gold specks in it, and then I realise what we've done. We had inadvertently taken the Bigfoot's personal collection of river stones from the tree, and he had come back to ask for them back. The prize collection that he'd stashed away in the open hollows of that willow tree. It all made perfect sense now. "Oh, you want your stones back? Hold on a minute. I'll go and get them for you." My heart is flapping with excitement as I dash through the house as quickly as I can to retrieve the stones we'd removed from the tree. A family of Bigfoot had approached us to ask us for their treasured stones back, that I quickly ascertained probably belonged to the younger Bigfoot. I pick up the little bowl of stones in my hand. It's standing on the oakwood coffee table. I transfer them into a white plastic bag and quickly hand it over to the large Bigfoot male. The creature grunts. He opens the plastic bag to inspect the contents. He seems satisfied. "Ma, ima, ushopa, iolop, anika, no." He nods at me and hands the plastic bag to his youngling, that although 8 foot tall, is quite literally the most ebullient creature I've ever witnessed in my life. He lets out several excited whoops, grabbing the plastic bag so happily, and in his hasty enthusiasm, a few stones go flying out of the bag, dropping onto the ground. So he squats on his hands and knees and picks the stones up one by one, replacing them very carefully into the bag. It is as if he's been reunited with a lost treasure and is over the moon to be reacquainted with his beloved, highly prized bounty. I watch incredulously as he picks up each stone to examine it in his thick fingers, as if seeing them for the very first time, with a pleasure I've never ever seen in a human being before. I watch in awe as he picks up the aquamarine stone, and the Bigfoots pass the stone between each other, their eyes fixated on its beauty. The male Bigfoot speaks to me in his language, words I don't understand. Api, oma, ip, ahinatup, obi, apa, ipopo, abasinipo. But I know his words express his appreciation, as if we have done them a great favour. For a moment the male hesitates, and then he steps forwards. He pats me, and then he pats Sybil on the back, to thank us, while the shy female looks at us gratefully through animated sparkling brown eyes. The look she's giving me is saying, "You have no idea how upset my son was to lose his stones. Thank you for giving them back to him." I realise the little Bigfoot must have seen us in the woodgrove, stealing his stone collection he kept hidden in the hollows of that weeping willow. He was the one watching us. He was the one following us through the woodgrove. It would seem he told his parents that we had taken his stones, and they discussed in earnest how they were going to retrieve them from us, which must be the conversation we heard taking place outside the cabin in the middle of the night that scared us half to death. Finally, the creatures had knocked loudly on our door at night, and when we didn't answer, due to our complete demoralizing terror, as it sounded like the axe murderer was trying to break down our door and was about to sever our bodies into thousands and thousands of pieces. In truth, the noise was so discomposing, I was actually wondering that whoever it was that was standing outside the door that night, whether they'd actually break it down to get to us, and with only bear spray, a fire poker, and a kitchen knife in hand for our protection, we didn't stand a chance against a deranged killer. The creatures, possibly on sensing we were afraid, rather reluctant to answer the door, had decided to promptly wait until the morning to approach us. I knew it had taken for them a great deal of nerve to interact with us so boldly. I sensed that they were reticent, shy, evasive by nature, but when we interacted with them, I was struck by their warmth, their congenial demeanour, their benevolence, and their heartwarming emotional intelligence. I look up at the Bigfoot family and say to them in English, I'm so sorry for taking those river stones. I had no idea that they belonged to your little one." The Bigfoots watch my eyes, the movements of my mouth, my body language. They've been doing that for thousands of years. They understand that kind of language. I got a sense they understood exactly what I was saying, as if they'd read my thoughts, my mind, and my body. The creatures nod at me. The 3 of them glide back into the woods. The Bigfoot teenager is whistling excitedly. He's still examining his stones. He behaves like a 7-year-old in an 8-foot-tall overcoat. The male and female Bigfoot engage in earnest conversation, as if they're discussing us, as much as we're about to discuss them. When the Bigfoots were gone, Sybil is clasping her hands around her mouth. "Oh my God! Oh my God! Can you believe what's just happened? We've encountered a family of Bigfoot, and they came to visit us. I can't believe it. They came to visit us. This is so amazing. This is incredulous. It is the most exciting thing that has ever happened to me in my entire life. I didn't even believe those creatures were real until now. Can you believe it? This is also the most wonderful thing that has ever happened to me. I say, my eyes shining so brightly that I guarantee they would rival a diamond in their brightness. I'm so glad we stole the Bigfoot stones, aren't you? Said Sybil. If we hadn't, we'd never have had such an extraordinary encounter. Those creatures would never have approached us. You could tell they're very shy. I mean, they have to be. Not many people encounter them for that very reason. I mean, if you had told me yesterday that Bigfoot was real, I'd have laughed in your face. It makes me realise that we don't know the half of what is out there. There are no words in the English language adequate to describe the excitement that both me and Sybil felt about effaciously encountering that Bigfoot family. We were bouncing around the cabin like buoyant beach balls and kept saying, "My God, did that happen? Did that really happen?" We kept giving each other high fives. We both felt we had expediently hit the jackpot. So an impromptu visit to Lake Louise was seriously put on hold as we went to Banff to eat a delicious meal, to celebrate and reminisce over our providential encounter with the Bigfoots. There was a brisk wind blowing as we walked down the beguiling, rather enchanting streets of Banff, on the hunt for the perfect place for us to eat. Finally we found seating on tables outside a traditional Italian restaurant, serving delectable pastas and pizza choices. Our table overlooked the arresting views of this prepossessing mountain town. I think me and Sybil were giving off such exuberance that even the waitress who was serving us was smiling at us broadly, as if contagiously infected by our high-spirited, positive vibes. "If you don't mind my asking, you look like you've won the lottery. You haven't, have you?" she asked. "You know, I never ever win a thing." "It's better than winning the lottery," piped Sybil. She lowers her voice so that only the waitress can hear. "We only got to see a family of Bigfoots this morning. They came to ask us for their stones we had taken from them. It was incredulous. We're still pinching ourselves. It was so surreal. They were so human, so intelligent, so kind." "You didn't! You saw a family of Bigfoot! That's so not fair," she gasps. "You're not even from around these parts, are you? You're just visiting Banff." "We're from New York," I admit. "You know, I've lived here all my life. My grandfather and my uncle have both seen Bigfoots before, but never me. Why not me?" "Well, stranger things can happen," I tell the waitress. "It could happen to you one day. You never know. Yesterday we were wearing your shoes, but today our lives will never quite be the same again, I don't think. That's what people often say after an encounter with a Bigfoot," she says. "What about your uncle and grandfather? What happened to them?" I ask curiously. "Oh, my grandfather gifted a female Bigfoot for years," she told us. "He was very secretive about his friendship with the creature. You know what I've learnt about Bigfoot? Many people who encounter them, especially those who have a meaningful, really good encounter, they keep their mouths shut about the creatures. When I asked my Gramps to tell me about his story, he just says it's deeply personal and he has no wish to share it, but that it was one of his most treasured memories. That's unfortunate, I say. Maybe one day he'll tell you his story." "I don't think he will," says the waitress. "He's very, very secretive, you know." "What about your uncle? What was his experience like?" I ask. "Oh, my uncle had a fleeting sighting of a Bigfoot once crossing his path on a drive home close to Lake Louise. But it was such a brief sighting, possibly only lasted a few seconds. The creature was evasive." We tell the waitress about the stones we had taken. "Why don't you go to the esoteric shop down the road? They have baskets of pretty stones there. You could buy a few and put them in the tree where you found those stones. The Bigfoot would be thrilled to find them. Imagine that. You could also leave them some grapes, some chips, some Kit Kats on the tree. I happen to know they love grapes and Kit Kats. Oh, and they're crazy about peanut butter and apple pie. That's what my grandfather told me." "Thanks," we said. We'll do that. It's a brilliant idea, I said to Sybil. And so we ended up in the esoteric shop buying a selection of pretty stones. We bought some of the edibles the waitress had recommended. And when we were in the woodgrove that afternoon, there was no one following us or watching us. I was disappointed, as I knew that our previous stalker had been the tall, willowy young Bigfoot, and I'd have liked to have seen him again. The very thing that had scared us the day prior, I would have welcomed. We were surprised to see that the little large Bigfoot had placed his precious stones right in the same hollows all over again, in the same willow tree. He obviously trusted us not to steal back his stones. We placed some pretty stones into the hollows to accompany his single stones. It made me giggle to think about how the creature would react to find all these new stones now in his tree. I'd never seen anyone so thrilled to be acquainted with his stones again, as that Bigfoot was. I would describe his enthusiasm as quite literally off the charts. We hung a couple of bags in the tree, filled with peanut butter, grapes, peaches, pears, bananas, walnuts, Kit Kats, and an apple pie that we bought at the baker's. "Oh, I can't wait for the Bigfoots to find the stash we leave for them," says Sybil enthusiastically. In truth, we did believe that the Bigfoots would find the stuff we left, but we never expected to see them again. But to our amazement, we did. That very night when we retired to bed, we heard a loud banging at the front door of the cabin. We woke up with a start, looking at each other, but this time with bright eyes. Once again it sounded like the axe murderer was about to break down the door. But terror did not entertain our thoughts, not even for a fleeting second. Me and Sybil were like two giggling schoolgirls getting excited over a childish crush. "It's the Bigfoots! Oh, my word! It's them! I know it is!" whispered Sybil, barely able to contain the bubbly, frolicsome glee in her voice, which was indisputable. "I know it's them! They're definitely back! Oh, my God! They've come back to see us!" I knew she was right. I instinctively sensed the Bigfoots were back. They were paying us a visit. They wanted to thank us for the stones and gifts we'd left them. With an irrepressible, zestful jubilance, we dashed over to the front door to open it. There was a generous moonlight that cast its soft ethereal shadows over the alpine meadow. We could see the distinct silhouettes of the three Bigfoots standing outside our cabin door, looking at us with bright yellow eyeshine. I remember thinking to myself, if I was to see these creatures at night like this, and not fully comprehend who they were, I would probably be terrified out of my wits. Instead, I am giving the creatures a gormless grin, and Sybil is doing much the same. We simply can't wipe the smiles off our faces. The male Bigfoot looks wet. His hair is clinging to his skin. He steps forward with a string of rainbow trout in his hands, which he hands to me. He speaks to me in his strange language again, and I know he's thanking me. "Ompa, akipa, imopa, a umobosha, ina hipovovo, imofi." The female Bigfoot is nodding her head vigorously, as if she's agreed with everything her partner is saying. The rich warmth of his words makes me feel so uncommonly touched. I can sense their incredible gratitude. The parents step away for the young Bigfoot to step forward, and he does so. To our amazement, he puts a river stone in each of our hands, one for Sybil and one for me, which we were to discover had golden red flecks in the stone. "Thank you," we say, and the little Bigfoot nods excitedly and chatters at us so quickly, while the female is nodding. I think he's telling us how thrilled he was to find the stones. And when he reaches a part of the conversation when he's telling us he discovered the stones, he starts to jump up and down and whistle. The female Bigfoot is nodding as if to say, "Yes, that's what happened." And once again, the male steps forward, the big male Bigfoot, to tap us both on the back like he did last time. Finally, they nod at us and glide away and are gone. Me and Sybil hug each other impulsively, unable to get any sleep that night. We were thrilled to have seen the Bigfoots again, and they certainly loved our gifts. The following morning we cooked the rainbow trout, and I have to say, I've never tasted more delicious fish. When we returned to New York, Sybil and I became the very best of friends. You can't share an experience like that and not become close. If that wasn't weird enough for you, a week later I receive a letter from the young man Dowie who had attacked me and left me for dead on a New York sidewalk. "Dear Winona, I'm probably the last person in the world you would ever like to hear from. I'm the young man that attacked you that day on a South Bronx pavement, and I can only apologize profusely for what I did. I left you for dead, and I admit I hoped you would die. I thought I would extract revenge on Sybil, my brother's wife at the time, so that in some way I would hurt her by hurting her friend. I had no idea at the time that she barely knew you at all. Sybil had testified against my brother, who was locked up in prison for attempted murder, and I saw red. I wanted revenge on my brother's behalf, but the police had warned me that if I laid a finger on Sybil, I would be enjoying the rest of my life, or a large part of it, that is, behind bars. So why not beat up one of her friends? For me, it seemed like a no-brainer. I'm so ashamed of what I did back then, and what a dreadful thug I was, without any remorse, no compassion whatsoever. I think from a young age, when I was bullied at school for being so overweight, people making fun of me because of my size, I was bursting with such an anger that I could not contain. I swore to myself that when I got fit and lost the weight, I'd make all those bullies pay. And I certainly did just that. I doubt any of those bullies will dare tease anyone for being overweight again. I scared the living hell out of them. I found out where they lived and beat them all up. They begged me not to kill them, but none of them had the courage to testify against me. I had warned them that if they told the police that I had hurt them, I would be after their families next, and they took me at my word. None of those bullies told on me. They were too afraid of the repercussions. I thought I could get away with hurting people without facing the consequences of my actions. I never imagined that going to prison would quite literally change my life. It was a desolate, lonely place, filled with so many lost souls who have taken the wrong fork in the road, much like myself. It was the chance visit of a pastor to the prison that quintessentially changed my life. I found God in the prison, and I am not who I was back then. I want to apologize for the grief and pain I inflicted on you, as there is no excuse for what I did. Please, will you forgive me? Kind regards, Dowie. As you can imagine, I was stunned by the letter, and wrote back to him saying, Dear Dowie, I forgive you for what you did to me on the pavement in the South Bronx in a moment of madness. I believe that hurt people hurt people. I'm sorry that your childhood was wrought with so much bullying. It was unfortunate that the kids taunted you about your weight growing up. That must have hurt a whole lot and undermined your self-esteem. You were angry. You lashed out, although it doesn't make what you did right. I'm so delighted to hear you have found God, and in doing so have found yourself and the peace you deserve to enjoy. Now you need to do one thing for yourself. Forgive yourself for what happened. I certainly forgive you. Sometimes it's so much easier to forgive others than to forgive ourselves. Life is too short and precious to live in any kind of hate. I learnt that a long time ago. I'm returning to my job as a social worker, helping hurt people, victims of abuse. It's what I like to do. I think what happened to me on that New York sidewalk in the South Bronx will make me a more compassionate listener, a better social worker, so I can identify with people who've been physically stabbed, emotionally harmed. I received counselling after the event, when you stabbed me in South Bronx, from a brilliant therapist called Doreen White. At the time, I suffered dreadful panic attacks from the aftermath of post-traumatic stress disorder. But after a trip to Alberta with Sybil, your brother's ex-wife, I managed to overcome my anxiety. Since that trip, I've no longer had a single panic attack, I'm glad to tell you. In fact, getting close to nature has grounded me, put everything in my life in perspective. I had a life-changing experience in Alberta that transformed my life. It was an epiphany, you could say, where I learnt that there is so much beauty in the world, and not to sweat the small stuff. Thank you so much for writing to me. I would like to visit you sometime, if I may. Regards, Winona. To cut a long story short, I visited Dowie several times in jail. I'm still working as a social worker, but am now married with children, and the panic attacks are a thing of the past. Sybil is happily married to a non-abusive man, who treats her like a queen, which is what she deserves. To date, we remain the very best of friends. We still own our own individual stone that the Bigfoot youngling gave us, and still maintain that meeting that Bigfoot family was the best thing that ever happened to us. Sybil believes that stealing the Bigfoot stash of stones from that tree was quite the best thing that she's ever done. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, Marcus Fielding stares out at the darkness, following the white line that will lead him to his end. He knows that his end cannot come soon enough. He has longed for this day to arrive. He will be dead soon, and he is very, very glad. For in the end, only then will he experience the peace that he has been craving, like a hardened dieter in a coffee shop, drooling over the tempting, irresistible chocolate cake on display behind the glass counter, waiting for that one ecstatic moment when calories don't count. Suffice to say, in this blissful end of life, Marcus will find an end to the pain, to the grief, to the guilt that has shackled his heart for so long, making him a prisoner to a grievous despair that he can no longer tolerate. An emotional pain that is so aggressively physical, he can feel it pulsating from the tips of his toes to the very last strand of hair on his head. Let's just say, until this pivotal moment in time, Marcus only knew physical pain came as a consequence to a fortuitous accident or a disease that ravaged the body so voraciously, but he had never known that emotional pain could physically really hurt like this. He had had enough. He had reached the point of no return. He wanted out. There was a time when life had been kind to him, when the congenial sunshine had dappled his face with a friendly smile, when the rain had sent refreshing showers streaming down his cheeks, when the earth had invited his bare feet to grace its surface, and he had enjoyed the feel of the green grass massaging his toes, when the days had gracefully rolled into days like the consistent, reliable, undulating waves of the ocean, when the mundane practicalities and routines of daily life had demanded his attention, when the nights came and went under a dark sky, and when uplifting laughter had reverberated through his home, like the joyful trilling tunes of the songbirds in the woodgrove. Today Marcus will remove the unwanted scribbles of his life that he wished had never been written, the notes he wished he'd never ever made, the drawings he wished he had never drawn. When this is all over, Marcus will tear it all out, throw away, discard the chapters of his book that brought him to this place of no return, and the relief he will receive will be beyond measure. These days Marcus has become the background noise in every conversation, with his wife, kids, or even co-workers. He has shrunk away from his life like a tortoise retreating into the safety of its shell. He no longer sings along to the music as he drives along to work each day, tapping the steering wheel in time to its pulsating beats, like he did in the good old days, when life had meaning, purpose, substance and depth, but not anymore. Now his world has faded, like a brand new pair of dark denim jeans that has been through too many cycles in the wash and will never ever look quite the same again. The world these days has lost its glitter, its sparkle, its meaning. It has become a dark, hostile place, where smiles are lost in the dark shadows, laughter drowned in the distant lakes, hope eclipsed in the night sky, like a shooting star that is there 1 minute, gone the next. He could feel his life was closing in on him so tightly, like a boa constrictor squeezing the very life out of him until he can breathe no more and there is nothing left of him. There is no doubt in Marcus's mind that the evanescence of the aimless canvas in his life has become all but a blank, purposeless, flat, empty page, where the only negligible paint you can see is white. Joy knows no memory in his heart. Colour has been eclipsed from his life in all its diversities, tones, shades and tints. In his mind's eye, there is absolutely no point to anything. Marcus aimlessly drives on into the night, his focus on the light beams ahead of him from his headlights,
that light up the road. Towering obscure trees have become all but menacing tenebrous shadows that loom above the rocky embankments like hunched old men that peer over the road, their vertical forms disappearing into the twilight, their detailed leafy regalia eclipsed by the night. He grips the steering wheel tightly, his heart beating fast. He can feel the earnest vibration in his chest as he edges ever closer to the point of no return, where a choice cannot be unmade once the line has been crossed. Marcus had chosen the spot for his demise over 2 weeks ago, a steep drop on a sharp turn, with a warning sign demanding drivers to proceed with caution, for if your truck goes flying down that sheer edge to the rugged valley below, filled with velvety firs and old groves of ancient trees, you will surely meet your end, beyond question. It would be impossible to survive that steep, uncongenial drop. He is not the first, nor will he be the last, to have ended his life here. But the great news about this location is no one would ever be certain whether it was an accident or not. This event will leave behind it the indelible impression of doubt. Against his better judgment, Marcus reflects over his 2 children, Jake, 12, and Justin, 14, who he will be leaving behind. Justin is one of those slim athletic boys that has the handsome, perfectly symmetrical face of an angel, blonde bouncing hair, blue eyes, a splattering of freckles across his nose, perfect Nordic looks. He is the kind of boy that sails through life so smoothly, on waters devoid of choppy waves, calm, serene winds that know no angst or tumultuous currents. It is like in his life the parking spaces are always available for him when he needs to park his truck. The traffic lights never turn red, for wherever he goes, life just works out for him so fluidly, so seamlessly, without the inevitable barricades and obstacles to block his path, experienced by so many. But for Justin, he knows no such vexating inconveniences. He's the popular boy in school, the one people congregate around and love to be associated with, the one who achieves straight A's without even breaking a sweat, the one who picks up a scratch card and wins $20,000 on a whim, the kind of child that Marcus had loved to hate growing up when he was a young boy. Then there's Jake, his younger beloved son. Jake, who was not so lucky. Jake, who was podgy and plump. Who tries so hard but never gets it right. Who finds life a disappointment, and life in turn finds disappointment in him. Jake with the crooked nose and the round face, who tirelessly struggles to succeed, but often lands flat on his face and has to attempt it all over again, like a toddler learning to walk. The boat Jake is sailing has lost its sails a long time ago. The waters are turbulently choppy, not smooth. Jake, the boy who works so hard, studies relentlessly, eats very little, but remains fat. Jake, whose performance in school, on the sports field and at home, is mediocre, standard, run-of-the-mill. Jake, who reminds him of himself when he was a young boy, only he had never battled with his weight like Jake did. Sadly, Jake had taken after his wife's great-grandmother in this unfortunate regard, who had eaten like a bird all her life and weighed but a ton. For some people it really was about genetic disadvantage and poor metabolism. He knew this well. Jake was the one on who life had not stretched out its favour towards him, or even offered him a scant reward for his gallant efforts and stoic struggles. This outrageous, blatant, indiscriminate unfairness had made Marcus angry, very, very angry. There were times he had scolded God, told him that he wasn't fair. Why did he have so many favourites? Why did he make it so easy for some like his son Justin, and such an arduous struggle for others like Jake? Was there some kind of insane method to this obscene, macabre, treacherous and irrational madness? He did not think so. Marcus had lost respect for God a long time ago. He had seen some of the most miserable, mean people be blessed with lives devoid of struggle and challenge, who were not deserving of this magnanimous favour. He knew many of these people himself, They had crossed his path from time to time, self-entitled, exceedingly wasteful, vainglorious in their self-infatuation, smothered by an obscene, overindulgent, privileged life, peppered with remarkable good fortune, and they were not worthy of any of it. If Marcus were God, he would have snatched those perks away from those kind of self-indulgent people a very long time ago, so that they might gain a measure of humility, learn what it was like to really struggle. Then there were kind, generous people who had so little, struggled to face the tumultuous storms of life, often with such a stoic, courageous attitude. It wasn't right. Life was so unfair, and Marcus knew when he reached the other side he had a big axe to grind with God, and he fully intended to get his voice heard. Marcus's thoughts linger over to his long-suffering wife, Crystal, who had put up with him all these years, and for what? He couldn't fathom. He didn't deserve his wife. He knew that. When he looked into her pretty face and her fragile, delicate blue eyes, he was reminded of what he'd done to her, and the shameful guilt he felt about his treachery was overwhelming. And despite what he had done, she had remained loyal, devoted, and faithful to him. Furthermore, she had forgiven him. It might have been easier on him if she hadn't. In truth, he had never been able to forgive himself. This was the quintessential root of all his problems. This was his greatest undoing, the trigger that pressed the button to self-destruct. Marcus felt wretched. If there was any consolation or redemption over what had happened, he had been drunk on that evening in question, but he knew that was a pitiful excuse. How many people blamed booze for their bad behaviour? But it was Marcus who had chosen to drink in the first place. No one had forced the alcohol down his throat. It was Marcus who had said yes to more alcohol, when he could barely stand up or walk in a straight line. Yet he continued to drink. Why things got so out of hand, Marcus could not fathom. But they did, and there was no going back. There was no backtracking. You can't undo your actions, or rewrite the script that you've already acted out. Let's just say, he hadn't even liked the girl in the office that had shamelessly flirted with him day in and day out over the last year, when she started working for the Lewis Strong partnership. She had been fluttering her long fake eyelashes at him, and laughing at all his jokes, many of which had not been remotely funny. But it felt good to be appreciated. He did admit that. Marcus cringes as he recalls how he was persuaded to go to a bar after work, to celebrate a colleague's birthday, when in truth his only desire was to return home to his loving family and beloved wife Crystal, whom he loved more than life itself. Oh, how he had failed her! How he hated himself for what he had done! He saw himself now as a lower form of pond life that deserved no respect. He was bitterly ashamed of what he had done. He knew there were men out there that would say, "Get a grip. It's no big deal. It happened, bro. Get over it." But Marcus had reached a dead end in the road, and he couldn't get over that hurdle that had stolen his joy, robbed his life of all its peace. "Go on," one of his work colleagues had joked. "You never join us for a drink after work. Don't be such a wet blanket, Marcus." Marcus had reluctantly agreed to join them for drinks that night, but he'd never been a big drinker in the first place, and one drink had led to another, and then another, and another. He had failed to call his wife Crystal, and he had stayed in that bar for far too long, until the bar became but a cloudy whirl. He felt as if he was on a boat at sea. Everything began to wobble and spin. He became unsteady on his feet. He had vague memories of Samantha Tansey tapping his knees, being very flirtatious with him. That was all he remembered, as he had fuzzy snippets in his mind of Samantha's laughing face that stared at him in his recall like a manic clown. He awoke in a strange bed, to find himself lying naked, entangled in Samantha Tansey's unfamiliar arms. The scent of her cheap, cloying perfume stuck to his nose, the evidence of their nightly passionate indulgences clearly seen by the scattering of clothes that lay in a shameful, indelible puddle on the oakwood floor. "Oh no," he thought, "this can't be happening to me, not to me." But he knew that what he was seeing was no dream. He remembered pulling Samantha's arm out of the way, diving out of the bed, with Samantha protesting. "Where are you going, Marcus? Don't leave me. My bed. It's already getting cold without you." "Home to my wife," he said, as he hurriedly, with his back turned away from Samantha, to spare himself some modesty, whatever he had left, began to throw on his clothes as quickly as he could. The shame, the humiliation of what he must have just done, hung over him like a black cloud. "I don't know what this is all about, Samantha," he says, pointing to the clothes heaped on the floor. "I have no memory of what happened here last night. I am not this person. I don't behave like this." "Oh, don't be so coy, Marcus. You loved every minute of it last night. You wanted it as much as I did. You couldn't get enough of me. You can protest as much as you like, but last night was amazing. Your wife doesn't have to know about any of this. I won't breathe a word about it. It's our secret. We're both attracted to each other. It's only a bit of fun. We're consenting adults, aren't we?" "This is no fun for me, Samantha. This is sick and it's warped, and I want no part of it. I don't know what happened last night, and you know I don't want to know. I drank way too much. I wake up in your bed with no memory of how I even got here. I'm going home to my wife to tell her exactly what I've done. And I just pray to God that she will forgive me. I feel disgusted, revulsed with myself. My behaviour last night was not that of a man, but of a hormonal teenage boy who has his mind in his pants. I never knew I was capable of this. I've even shocked myself." Marcus had done just that. But when he saw the woman he loved looking so hurt, he'd never been able to forgive himself. He had caused such devastation to his best friend, and to see her pain was insufferable to him. And every time he looked at his wife, he was reminded of his iniquity. The relationship with his wife changed. It was like she emotionally distanced herself from him. She was afraid of being hurt again. It was like she emotionally distanced herself from him for her own self-preservation. She was afraid of being hurt. It was like she was looking at him differently, as if viewing him through a different lens, in a less than agreeable light, as if she was thinking, "I don't know you anymore, Marcus." Even though she had forgiven him, he knew he had lost her trust, and to him, that was like losing everything. "I don't know what to say," his wife had said, her eyes filling with tears. You slept with another woman." "It meant nothing, sweetheart, nothing." "Is she prettier than me? Is that why you slept with her?" "Oh, for goodness sake, Crystal, I wish you wouldn't talk like that, putting yourself down. It's ridiculous. There isn't a woman in this world prettier than you. I've always told you that. Samantha doesn't hold a candle to you. She's not even attractive. Girls like her who deliberately set out to sleep with married men, well, they're not right in the head, are they? They probably have issues with self-esteem. God only knows what goes on in their heads. That's why they do it. Samantha's been flirting with me for months, despite knowing I was a married man. She took advantage of me when I was drunk. Not that that is an excuse, of course." "Is she charming? Funny? Cute?" "Goodness gracious, no. Honestly, Crystal," Marcus had assured her. "Is there anything charming about a woman who seduces you when you're in a drunken state? I have no real memory of what happened. I'm so sorry, Crystal. That woman knew I was out for the count. She got her claws in me when I was in a vulnerable place. I know it's no excuse, but I promise you that's what happened." His wife had taken his hand in hers and squeezed it tightly, but it broke his heart to see the pain in her face. It grieved him to hurt the person he loved more than anything else in the world. "I forgive you, sweetheart, but it's going to take me a while to get over it. Be patient with me. I know things like this can happen, but thinking of the two of you in bed together, it's just too awful for words. And knowing you even let this happen, it breaks my heart. You were the one who continued to drink." It was after that inauspicious night, spent with Samantha Tansey, that left indelible roots so deep they could not be shifted for Marcus without a bulldozer at the helm. Marcus could bear it no more. The pain of hurting his wife was the final straw, the final nail in the coffin, when enough was enough. He couldn't live with the guilt any more. Some people might be able to brush it off them, as if it was no big deal, but the nauseating self-recriminations stuck to Marcus like chewing gum. If he was out of the way, his wife could begin again. She could press the reset button on her life. She deserved better than him, and he wanted out. Some people might have thought Marcus was being selfish, but he believed he was doing his family a favour, and he knew that for him his life had become meaningless, insipid, as plain as a white page. Of course he loved and adored his family, but they were so much better off without him, and if he had any influence on the other side, he would do everything in his power to help Jake have a better life. On this side of life he could only watch helplessly as his son struggled with mediocrity, while his wife dealt with the grievous blow that he was responsible for inflicting on her. Perhaps on the other side he could help her to heal. Marcus presses the accelerator down as the soulful song, "Hello, Darkness, my old friend," thunders through the radio. It reflects the tenebrous state of his mind, and is the perfect exit song for his story. He doesn't want to die with Celine Dion's voice ringing in his ears. No, this is much more appropriate. For a brief second he glances over the events of the last 24 hours, reflecting how people on death row in state prisons can order their favourite meals before they meet their maker. What had he eaten today? Nothing special, really. He'd ordered a tuna fish sandwich at the coffee shop in town, and the bread had been rather too chewy for his liking, while the iced tea he had drunk was so insipid it almost tasted like dirty bath water. Later that day he had dutifully returned home, washed the family cars, mowed the lawn, weeded the tenacious ugly weeds that were treacherously trespassing between the cracks of the red brick paving, and had been a nightmare to eliminate. He had planted some pretty seedlings in the flower bed for his wife to thoroughly enjoy, and watered some of the plants that were looking a little frazzled after the blistering hot heat they'd been having of late. So he'd done a fair amount of chores to help his wife out. He had told his wife how beautiful she was, and how much he adored her, and his 2 children never to forget how precious they were to him. They had both looked at him with bemused, befuddled expressions on their faces. "Dad, you're being so soppy. I want to cringe." He couldn't let any of them know that this was an intentional suicide. People may wonder, given the location of where his truck would be found when his deceased body was retrieved. They'd have to give him the benefit of the doubt that this was a serendipitous, unforeseen accident, as no one would be able to prove the contrary, or otherwise. That was the great thing about exiting life this way. It was uncomplicated and much more trouble-free for all parties concerned, and accidents were much easier to deal with than suicide, and far kinder. Suicide was naturally a choice, but accidents were unexpectedly random, and although tragic, there was less self-recrimination likely to be engaged in an accident, as is often the case in a suicide, when people continue to blame themselves for not seeing this coming, or picking up the signs of a person's depression. Marcus was driving on a treacherous pass on a high road in Okanogan County in north-central Washington, along the Canada-US border, the largest city in Omark. "Hello, Darkness, my old friend," is playing on the radio. This was the moment to go, and he'd never been more ready, as he was right now. He takes a deep breath as his car begins to round that sharp corner that twists and curls around the mountain. He's getting close. His fingers tighten their grip on the steering wheel to brace for impact. He can only hope his ending will be quick. Shooting himself in the head with a rifle was a coward's way to go out. He had believed this with all his heart. This was so much neater, a much neater way to end it all. Without a massive crime scene clean-up team arriving to clean up the gruesome splatter the following day. It would be too cruel to do that to his wife. Dying this way, his wife and family would be set up for life with a hefty life insurance policy. Marcus approaches the bend, and the music is now playing soulful words. People writing songs that voices never shared, and no one dared disturb the sound of silence. Everything becomes slower as Marcus moves closer and closer to his demise. And then he sees her emerging from nowhere on the edge of the road, her whole body caught up in the light of his truck. The girl runs towards the truck, and Marcus cannot slow down in time. In a moment of exquisite horror, forever imprinted on the landscape, he collides into the young woman. Her body, like a doll, is flung in the air, where it lands in a mangled heap on the ground, at the edge of the road. Her blood spatter has bespeckled his windscreen, while the front of his truck has taken a lashing. He slows down his truck, finding a place to park further along this narrow path. His heart heavy with regret. Why had the young woman run at him? He would not have been able to stop in time, even if he had been going at a slower speed. It was extraordinary, the way she'd run at him. It gave him goosebumps. For a brief second, she had almost seemed like a ghost. For a second, he thought she actually was. What the heck was she doing? That hauntingly sorrowful, almost apologetic look she had given him moments before impact. It tormented him when for a few fleeting seconds her eyes had burned into his, and then the wrath of his car. Well, it had done the rest, had it not? With a seamless efficiency, like the meat being thrown into the grinder at a sausage factory. It had been so surreal. For a moment, he could have been forgiven for believing that this was a dreadful dream. Marcus's account, in his own words. Everything had been going so smoothly for me. I couldn't have asked for a better exit to my life. I was looking forward to meeting my maker. I had some contentious issues I wanted to bring to his attention, about the blatant unfairness of this world that badly needed correcting. But now, the gnawing inconvenience of a strange young girl with a pixie-like face and pretty blue eyes had entered my field of vision, and hastily run into the road, gliding towards me like a tennis ball thrown off course. And even though I was going fast on this narrow twist in the road, this girl was running at me, as if she was asking to be mown down by my wheels, as if she was begging for an end to this overwhelming life, as much as I was. She was a stranger, whom I'd never met, but it seemed we both shared the same wish. We wanted out. It was almost like a soulful meeting of minds, an interchange, if you like, in very dramatic circumstances. Then it happened, and she didn't stand a chance. No one could have stood a chance. It is a gruesome sight that is ineffaceably seared into my memory, like an imperishable tattoo, being stubbornly burnt into my flesh, when the young woman's body is flung into the air, like a weightless rag doll. Everything in that poignant moment slowed down to a snail's pace, as the girl crashes to the ground, her delicate body walloping the asphalt road with a mighty thunderous punch. It was an ominous, haunting sound that I shall never ever forget. Many of the velvety-needled trees in the lower valley are steeped in an ambiguous obscurity, sinking gratefully into the dark shadows, the silent witnesses of this horrific event. Beyond that, there is no one else. I immediately pulled my truck over to the side of the road, overlooking the sheer steep drop, which during the day had spectacular views for tourists who don't suffer from vertigo, that is. As I race towards the girl, I know before I even get to her that all hope is lost, but I need to be absolutely sure about this. When I do get to her body, I notice a rather indeterminate, obscure figure is hovering over her corpse, slapping her face, as if trying to revive her. I'm standing about a foot away from this enigmatic scene, wondering who this huge, rather baffling man is, wearing a thick furry coat in the middle of a sweltering summer. Was he an angelic being, I wondered for a moment? Where had he come from? I heard no approaching trucks on this stretch of road. People know better to leave the area well alone when night falls, as the risk of driving here become quite great, with poor visibility, bad lighting, and sheer rocky ledges that can perilously lead you over the edge. I hurriedly dash up to the young woman, peering down at her mangled body in abject horror. It's not a pretty sight. "She's dead, isn't she?" I say. The figure in the heavy winter coat looks up at me. To my astonishment, I find myself looking into the noble face of a Bigfoot, who has the kind of face you would expect to see in an indigenous Indian warrior. High cheekbones, hooded deep-set dark eyes, a pronounced forehead. The creature is so human, it's almost uncanny. I never knew Bigfoots would be this human. In truth, I never knew Bigfoots actually existed until now. And this revelation has stung my perceptions of the world very hard indeed. The creature is looking at me, squatting on these tree-trunk-sized thighs that look like powerful, heavy-duty nutcrackers. I'm so astonished, I do a double take. I can't believe what I'm actually beholding. And for a moment I think I really must be dreaming. But there is no doubt in my mind. This Delphic creature is real. The Bigfoot looks up into my eyes. Our eyes lock for a moment. I notice his soulful eyes are dark, the colour of treacle. They have a yellow eye shine. They're filled with a melancholia that I can tangibly feel. I hear the audible words in my head. "I tried to stop her. I tried. But she wanted it to be over, like you do. You should not treat your life with so little regard. It's a gift. You would do well to remember that." "You spoke to me in my head. You spoke to me in my head," I repeat. "I don't understand how you do that. I heard your voice in my head. You spoke English to me, and you didn't even open your mouth. How does that even happen?" I'm completely floored by this peculiar method of communication, but let's just say I'm in no doubt that the creature spoke to me. The Bigfoot is looking at me through amused eyes, as if he finds my astonishment highly comical. I lean over the dead corpse of the young woman to inspect her more closely. "She's gone," I hear the voice saying in my head again. "There is nothing we can do now. She was determined to go. I tried to stop her 3 times, but this time I couldn't get to her in time." The Bigfoot rises to his feet from his squatting position, unfolding himself from the ground like a mighty beach umbrella, and I'm astonished by the sheer size of him. I notice he's easily 8 foot tall, possibly more, 700 to 800 pounds, and built like a powerful army tank. He is way more sturdy and robust than the truck that I'd been driving. He's covered in long flowing hair that was a little tangled, as there were a few thorny briars attached to it and a plethora of field grass. But I will confess, he didn't smell at all. If he did, it was so benign and so inoffensive, I couldn't smell a thing. The creature audibly sighs. He scratches his head, and I see genuine sorrow in his eyes as he takes one last look at the deceased young woman and then nods at me. I once again hear the words in my head, "I will leave her to your charge." I watch in awe as he glides away. I tremble as I call the emergency services. There are ambulance and police sirens everywhere, including the coroner, whom I'm surprised arrives on the scene at this time of night to inspect the body. She's wearing plastic clothes, and the area has been cordoned off with tape. It is clear no trucks will be able to use this pass for the moment. Any vehicles will be redirected, but luckily there's no traffic around, apart from emergency vehicles, as most people would have more sense than to drive on a treacherous pass at this time of night. "This was an instant death, Officer Balotelli," she's saying. "The young lady wouldn't have known a thing. She was here 1 second, gone the next. It was lights out for her at once." "Would she have suffered, ma'am?" "Absolutely not. I doubt she felt a single thing." The officer I saw speaking to the coroner observes me standing beside my damaged truck, and he ambles towards me hurriedly. "Are you Marcus Fielding, the man who called emergency services?" "Yes, sir, that's me. I'm Officer Ian Balotelli. I wish we could have met under better circumstances. Dreadful scene of carnage, is it not? You never get over accidents like this.
awful waste of a life. This place is notorious for fatal accidents, I'm afraid. Can you tell me exactly what happened here, sir? You were saying on your call that she ran at your car. Is that right?
It was very bizarre, officer. I was driving around that sharp corner, going faster than I should have been. But even if I had been going at a slower speed, I confess I would have never been able to stop for the woman in time. It seemed that without question, she was running at me. I honestly don't know why. She was trying to commit suicide, says Officer Balotelli. 5 minutes before your call, we had a very intriguing phone call, I have to say. It was from a man claiming he'd been driving around exactly the same stretch of road as you. It was about 25 minutes ago, with that sharp curb over there, near the sheer drop, and he saw a young woman flying towards his car, almost begging to be run over. He reported a monstrously big man, wearing a Bigfoot costume, with a very human face, lunging towards her, throwing her on his arms, and out of the way in the nick of time. Saved her life, he did, I gather. He described the man as masterfully acrobatic. Looked like someone who could perform in a circus. He was so adroit, so agile, so flexible, I gather. The driver was very shook up, I have to say. Had a dreadful shock. Was actually in tears on the phone. He explained that the girl was furious to be rescued and was lashing out at the man wearing the Bigfoot suit. All I can say is the mind boggles. People never cease to amaze me. He must have been suffocating wearing a costume like that, although how he managed to look 8 foot tall is beyond me. They can do incredible things these days with costumes, I believe. It's amazing what they can do these days. How do you know it wasn't the real deal? I asked the officer. The Bigfoot, I mean. How do you know that the creature was not a real Bigfoot? Are you kidding me, sir? Says the officer. Please, do I look like an idiot? I was not born yesterday. Funny enough, that's exactly what the driver said to me. He said that the Bigfoot was real. He was certain of that. He could see the muscles beneath the skin. He told me that the Bigfoot was huge, but I persuaded him to see common sense. All I can say is it must have been a man, wearing a jolly good suit. They make excellent costumes at Universal Studios these days. Everybody knows that Bigfoot is just folklore. The creature is just fictitious. Most people who claim to have seen the creature have rarely only encountered bears. It's amazing how suggestive the imagination can be. Anyway, getting back to this rather bewildering story. The man, having nearly run over the young woman, was in a dreadful state of shock. He was telling me he was shaking like a leaf. He got out of the truck to see what was going on. He told me he was frightened because of the Bigfoot he'd seen. He perceived it could potentially be a dangerous creature. So he left the truck with a firearm in his hand. He thought that the woman might have been frightened off by the Bigfoot and run directly in the road to escape him. But it did not explain why the woman was running at him in the way she had been. Instead, he discovered the woman shouting at the man in the Bigfoot suit. "Why don't you leave me the hell alone? If I want to kill myself, it's my business. It's got nothing to do with you. You can do nothing to stop me. Why do you keep on rescuing me all the time? Leave me the hell alone. And stop telling me my life is a gift. My life is not a bloody gift. It's a noose around my neck. And I've had enough. I want out now. Go away. Go away. Leave me alone." It was then that the witness reported that the woman was obviously suicidal. But he only managed to call us a couple of minutes before you called us. He was unable to calm down from the shock of the bizarre event. He couldn't make sense of any of it. It was very peculiar to him, the whole thing. Let's just say if the man had managed to compose himself and phoned a little earlier, maybe we would have arrived on the scene in time and taken the young woman into psychiatric care. But it was not to be. Suffice to say, I do not know, of course, the mystery identity of the man wearing the Bigfoot suit. He was quite a hero by all accounts. But I ask you,
Wearing a Bigfoot suit and sweltering conditions like this is insanely ridiculous. I don't know what he was thinking. I imagine he was hiding at the side of the road, hoping to show himself to any vehicles that go past at night, so people will say they've seen a Bigfoot. But he chose a crazy location, and not many trucks drive here at night. Needless to say, I am always surprised what people will do for attention. It boggles my mind, let me tell you. I saw the creature too, sir, when I pulled over. It was definitely not a man in a costume. He was real. I saw him up close. Oh, please, laughed the officer. Don't you give me that nonsense. Not you as well. The young woman was talking to the man in the suit. I very much doubt she would talk to a real Bigfoot. As I keep telling you, it must have been one hell of an impressive suit. I know you've had a dreadful shock, sir. I can't imagine what you've been through right now. Running over a young woman is not something one can easily get over. I can recommend a great counsellor for you, who knows how to deal with victims of trauma. Your truck is going to be examined by forensics. It's our normal procedure here. And when you've received the all clear, we will organise for it to be cleaned and repaired for you. The front end of your vehicle has taken a rather nasty beating, I see. You must give my officer your insurance details. We have to establish this is a suicide first, but based on the previous witness and your account, it sounds like this is definitely the case. Of course, we need to inform the next of kin. Find out who this mystery woman actually is. There may, of course, be an inquest. Who knows? In the meantime, I will take your details and keep you posted. You might need to come into the station to make a statement. I'll get Malcolm to take you back home. Malcolm's one of my officers. You'll be needing a lift.
Moments later, I'm sitting on the leather seats of Malcolm's truck. The police officer who's taking me back home. He was a garrulous character. I could understand why he'd become engaged in the police, as I could see he loved drama of every kind. His eyes were literally animated, as if everything that had transpired, as macabre as it was, beheld for him a great intrigue. He found this aspect of the job quite exciting, I could see.
Do you mind me asking you, sir, why you would drive that route at night? He asks me. It's so dangerous. You could end up veering off that sheer drop, you know. And then it's over Cordovas for you. Personally, I wouldn't willingly choose to drive there at night. It's bad enough during the day, let me tell you. I only ever come here when we're on duty. That's when I have to drive to this spot. And over the years, there's been a lot of fortuitous deaths over there. I imagine it is dangerous, I say, but I'm a good driver. I'm a good driver as well, but I still wouldn't risk it. Why would you drive there at night, if you don't mind me asking? Where were you going? I just wanted to take a drive. Bad day at work, you know. Couldn't get any sleep. You know the scenario.
The officer looks at me befuddled.
With the greatest of respect, sir, you could take a drive without engaging any element of risk. Driving on a road on a mountainous elevation like that, with a lethal drop, is asking for trouble, especially when there's poor visibility up there. One wrong turn, and you're in grievous trouble. Why on earth would you choose such a treacherous spot to drive at such an ungodly hour of the night when you can't see a thing? If I didn't know better, I'd say you were like that poor girl. You had a suicide wish of some kind. Either that, or you were looking out for a ghost. The area is reputed to being haunted. We get lots of giggling teenagers going up there, hoping to spot something outer-worldly. Oh no, officer, none of the above, I assure you, I lied. I just liked the views from up there. I wanted to enjoy a drive. I understand, sir. But to be fair to you, you're not going to see many views at night. Look out of your window now. What do you see? Nothing much, officer. You're absolutely right. I don't know what I was thinking. Believe it or not, sir, those are words I hear again and again on the force. I don't know what I was thinking, officer. He pauses for a moment, clears his throat and says, So tell me, sir, are you going to be all right? Seeing that poor woman running at your car tonight, is not something you easily get over. It must have been brutal for you. Rarely brutal. I worry about people like yourself witnessing such dreadful carnage. In the force, we're conditioned to have stomachs of iron. It goes with the territory of being a police officer. But for you lot, it's not easy. I do strongly encourage you to seek counselling. It'll be a very good idea if you did. I think I'll be all right. I say, I'm still in shock. I gather there was a man wearing a Bigfoot costume who rescued the young woman the first time she ran into the road to attempt suicide. I mean, I ask you, why would anyone wear a Bigfoot costume in sweltering conditions like this? What's wrong with people? That's the thing about being in the police force. People do and say the strangest things to get attention. We see it all the time. We had a case recently of a man wearing a Batman suit on Route 823. He was standing in the middle of the road, waving at the cars, with a huge grin on his face. He was seeing himself as some kind of superhero. He was lucky he didn't get mown down by the cars. He said he did it because he wanted people to see that Batman was real. He actually believed he was Batman. Can you believe it? You're kidding, I gasp. No, I'm not, he chuckles. Then there was a case when a woman phoned emergency services. Her kid was standing on the edge of the roof of her home on his birthday after having received his Superman costume. The kid had intended to jump, believing he was going to take off in flight like Superman. I suppose you could say he had a good imagination, but that wasn't going to get him very far in life if he jumped off that roof. Wow, you must see some things in your line of work. That is certainly a shocker. Don't get me started. I've seen it all, believe me. Drugs and alcohol are the worst. They make people do nonsensical things, I can tell you. As the police officer drives down our drive, I can see the curtains of the upstairs window of our house twitching. I know it's my wife. Moments later, the front door is flung open. My wife races down the driveway towards us. She looks livid. Your wife, says the officer, chuckling. She looks like she's got a bone to pick with you. Or an axe to grind, more like it. Put it this way, I've seen angry women in my time, but your wife looks about as heated as you can get. She could even fry eggs on the pavement tonight, with the heat she's generating, along with this heat wave.
I reluctantly open the passenger side door of the officer's truck and climb out, to be greeted by my wife's irate face, which has grown an ashen shade. She looks absolutely furious.
Where the hell have you been? I've been worried sick. Where is your truck? What are you doing in a policeman's truck, for goodness sake? I got up in the middle of the night, wondering where the hell you'd gone. I climbed out of bed and discovered not only was your truck not parked in the downstairs garage, but you were nowhere to be seen. Nowhere. I searched everywhere. What do you mean by going off in the middle of the night like this, without even telling me where you're going? Don't I have a right to know what you get up to? Or have you conveniently forgotten that I'm actually your wife? Don't be too hard on him, ma'am, says the officer, who has climbed out of the driver's side door, looking at the drama between me and my wife unfold. Your husband had a hell of a night tonight. He's been in a dreadful accident. A young woman was tragically killed, thrown up into the air by the wheel of your husband's truck. Died on impact. Very tragic state of affairs. Your husband is in quite a state. Oh, my God, says my wife, gasping as she cups her hand over her mouth in horror. You ran over a young woman tonight? You actually killed someone? I can't believe this. How could you do that? What the hell were you thinking? Oh, my God. I can't believe this is happening. This is a nightmare. It was bad enough you abandoning the house in the middle of the night to go for a spin in your truck. But killing someone, that just takes the biscuit. Is this some kind of a sick joke? Because if it is, I'm not laughing. Do I look like I'm laughing? Please, please tell me this is a joke. I need to know this is a joke, because if it isn't... Calm down, madam. It's not as bad as you think it is. Not as bad as I think, officer. Not as bad as I think. from where I'm standing, things couldn't get worse than this. You tell me my husband has run over a woman, killed her, and it's not as bad as I think. I don't think it could get worse than this. Officer, is my husband going to go to prison? Is he going to be locked away for years and years? What's going to happen to him? He's my husband, the father of our children. How are we going to cope if he's locked away for years and years? This is completely insane. Isn't this manslaughter? You could go down for a long time for manslaughter, if I'm not mistaken. I'm right, aren't I, officer?
Ma'am, you've got this all very wrong. It would seem we have strong evidence to suggest the young woman killed tonight was running at your husband's truck. She was suicidal. She appears to have pulled the same stunt earlier on in the evening. But a man in a Bigfoot suit rescued her. But she attempted the stunt a while later, and this time her suicide attempt was successful.
A man in a Bigfoot suit rescued her the first time? Do you realise how wacky you both sounding? How can you expect me to take a word just saying seriously? Now you really are winding me up.
No, it's true, sweetheart, I say.
Where the hell did this happen? What sharp turn are you talking about? The officer told my wife where the accident happened, and she glared at me all the more. What the hell is wrong with you? Why would you drive there of all places in the middle of the night? You know how many people have lost their lives on that spot over the last 100 years? People have actually jumped off cliffs there to commit suicide. You choose to drive there in the middle of the night? I don't get it. I really don't. You are very, very odd. That's all I can say.
I was just taking a pleasant drive in the middle of the night. Is there anything wrong with that? The views up there are excellent.
I've heard enough. What is wrong with you, Marcus?
Do you need your head examining?
What the hell were you thinking? You're very strange. That's all I can say. Let's just say I was in the doghouse for a while with my wife, who was outraged for me slipping out in the middle of the night and driving in a precariously dangerous location. I couldn't blame her for being mad at me. I reflected over everything that had happened that curiously intriguing but very tragic night. The idiosyncratic Bigfoot I'd encountered that was unequivocally real. I don't know how Officer Bolatelli had assumed it to be a man in a Bigfoot costume. I don't think he could envisage that the real thing could be plausible. Yet despite two credible individual witnesses, he still refused to believe that the Bigfoot was real, even taking into account its gargantuan size. Bear in mind, I'd been close up and personal to the Bigfoot, and this was no costume. By all accounts, Officer Bolatelli's ludicrous response and rational reason was seasoned by his naturally sceptical mindset. Clearly he did not want to entertain anything that pierced his rigid perception of the world. All he could do was to say that you can do so much with costumes these days. There are some people who refuse to listen to what they don't want to hear. In the end, both of us witnesses let him believe what he wanted to believe. It was so much easier that way. I thought about the Bigfoot I'd encountered an awful lot after this incident. In fact, he consumed my thoughts so much that even thoughts of ending my life seemed to have dissipated. I was astonished how the creature had spoken to me. He had known that that young woman was trying to take her life, as much as he had known that I was trying to take mine. How could he even know that? I decided the creature had to have some superhuman powers in telepathic awareness and psychic insight. That was the only explanation. It would seem, based on the first witness's account, the Bigfoot had spoken to the young girl, as he had spoken to me. It would seem he told her that life was a gift, and one would do well to remember that, just like he had told me. It was rather extraordinary and incredibly remarkable. I had been warned of the traumatic after-effects I would likely receive in the aftermath of the tragedy, and indeed, true to form, I was experiencing hauntingly graphic, rather torturing nightmares of the young woman's last moments, which kept tormenting me. I would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. Let's just say nothing prepares you for the shock when you feel that bump, hear the crash, see blood spattering across your windscreen. It's like a nightmare from the most dark movie. Ostensibly, even when I rushed over to the girl's body, sprawled in a mangled heap on the road, I knew she was dead. It was all too late.
I'll never forget the sorrowful look on the Bigfoot's deep dark eyes, with its yellow eyeshine, as he stared at me, with a sombre, aggrieved expression on his face. I realized that even though me and the young woman had never ever crossed paths, on the very same day, at the very same time, we were both looking to end our lives. I wondered about her story. Of course, I'd gone to the police station, as you do in these fortuitous events, to file a report, and of course to answer questions.
"Hello, Mr. Fielding. It's very good to see you,"
said Officer Bolatelli.
"How are you feeling today?"
He pauses for a brief moment.
"Sorry, that wasn't a very appropriate question to ask you, under the circumstances."
"I'm as well as can be expected, sir. Still in shock," I tell him.
"Of course you are," says the officer, leading me into the interview room. "Take a seat, Mr. Fiorentini. Would you like some coffee? Or can I get you a soda or something? I do believe we've even got some donuts on the go if you're interested." "A coffee will be great," I say.
The officer hands me coffee in one of those plastic cups. I take a large gulp, almost gagging from the taste. It's so strong. Perhaps they like it like this in the force, to get their engines firing on all cylinders at some of the ungodly hours they may sometimes be required to work.
"You'll be very glad to know, Mr. Fielding, that the young woman in question left a suicide note in her sock drawer with yesterday's date on it, telling her mother where her body would be found, how she was going to kill herself. It seems she didn't want the driver who mowed her down to get into any kind of trouble on her account, which was a jolly decent thing for her to do. People aren't always that graciously considerate when it comes to suicides, but she has made our lives a whole lot easier for all concerned, with the exception of those that are left behind, of course." "She actually left a note?" I ask. "Yes, she did leave a note. It's a pity, I say, that the man in the Bigfoot suit, whoever he was, didn't drag her off to get some real help at a psychiatric hospital. Then none of this may have happened. It seemed he disappeared off the face of the planet and failed to file a report. Maybe he was worried about what people would think about him, loitering around the place in a Bigfoot suit. I suppose it's not a very good look, if you think about it. I gather she tried this before. To kill herself, I mean. I don't know the details in particular. The mother claims her daughter was a very troubled, sensitive soul that found the world a hard place. She wanted out. The coroner is satisfied that this is a suicide, so you can have your truck back. But we've arranged for it to be cleaned and repaired for you. Your insurance is paying for the damage. We've sorted all that out for you. After you gave us your details, of course. Let's just say, given how traumatizing this experience must be for you, I always like to help wherever I can. That's our job on the force, to create calm in the storm, peace and safety to the community. Now I do have a favour to ask you, Mr. Fielding. I assure you that you are not obliged to honour my favour, but I would be exceedingly pleased if you would. I'd be happy, sir, to help where I can. It would seem the deceased girl's mother would like very much to meet you personally. She wants to know about her daughter's last moments. We don't normally go down this track, but the poor mother is insistent that talking to you will help her a lot. The poor woman is inconsolable with grief. What could I possibly say to her that could possibly make her feel better? I hardly think my words will bring her much comfort. You'll be surprised what you can do to help that poor woman. You'll be able to assure her firsthand that her daughter didn't suffer, that it was over for her in a second. I'm sure she wants to hear it from the horse's mouth, not just hearsay, if you get my drift. I could do that, but I still doubt I can be much of a comfort to her. I mean, what do I say to the woman whose daughter I ran over? You'll be surprised, very surprised. I think you will help her, and I think you should.
"What?" said my wife when I returned home. "You said the dead girl's mother would come here to talk about her daughter's last moments with you? Are you kidding me? And you agreed to this? You know how insane this sounds. I'm sorry, sweetheart, but some of the nonsensical things you're doing lately are very, very odd.
and at the very least questionable.
It might be insane, Crystal, but if I can help this woman in her grief, I will do all I can. In helping her, it might actually help me. And it's the least I can do in the circumstances. You know, people, when they're grieving, they're not always rational. Sometimes it's the strangest, most bizarre things that might bring them comfort. Officer Balotelli believes, if I tell the grieving mother that her daughter did not suffer, that it'll bring her immeasurable relief. But she needs to hear it from me. Otherwise, it's just hearsay to her. It's not enough for her to hear it from the coroner. The coroner was not there. I was.
Good for you, honey. I hope you know what you're doing. I don't want you upsetting yourself. Me and the kids are out of here. We're going to spend the afternoon with your parents. I don't want them hanging around that grief-stricken woman. What happened to you has naturally affected all of us.
Good idea, I say.
I watch my wife with my 2 kids climbing into the car. My kids wave at me. Bye, Daddy. Good luck. Hope everything goes all well. With that woman, I mean. I hope she isn't cross with you, Daddy. You must tell her it's not your fault, says Jake. In that moment, I almost feel ashamed that a couple of days ago, I intended to take my own life. It hits me like a brick to the head. Inadvertently, this young girl who committed suicide saved my life. I was still here, was I not? My plans to go through with my suicide mission had been halted and stalled when the young woman had stopped me by forcing me to slow down, which meant my truck didn't have the opportunity to go crashing over the sheer drop. And after the accident, I couldn't go through with it. I waited with bated breath for my visitor to arrive. I'm told her name is Felicity McGavin. Before long, I hear a truck purring down the long asphalt drive that leads directly to our double-storey home. I glance out of the large French windows in the kitchen area, with its prepossessing views that overlook the front yard, the pristine hedges, the mowed lawn, the red brick paving, the large gnarled oak tree that is casting its shaded shadows across the paving on this scorcher of a day. Very hot for Washington, I might add. I watch as a woman climbs out of her truck, closing the door behind her, her face glancing hesitantly towards my house. But despite her obvious reservations, I observe a sturdy determination written in her expression, a little like when you don't want to go to the dentist, but you bite your upper lip and go, because you know your teeth need attention. I recognize the face. It is the spitting image of the young woman I ran over, a slightly older version of her. It sends a chill running down my spine, as haunting images of that graphic, horrifying moment of impact come racing back into my mind. For a moment I come close to hyperventilating, but I quickly steady my nerves and compose myself as I hear the knock at my door. I draw in a deep breath. My heart is pounding, but I get to the door and I open it. The woman is standing in the doorway. She has a pixie face just like her daughter's, and a similar pair of earnest blue eyes. She is wearing makeup to cover up the telltale pink splotches on her skin that would reveal how much she's been crying. Try as she might, she can do little to disguise her melancholia. She looks like a woman who has suffered a grievous loss, and is not disguising it terribly well. Despite her very best efforts, I can see her eyes are red, and her mascara is smudged from sorrowful eyes that have failed to hold back their tears. The woman is wearing a striking green dress. It's emerald in colour, trailing down to above her ankles. It's made of an ethereal material that is almost floating and very cool. I wonder why she looks so elegant, as if she's going to a cocktail party, but I give the matter no further thought. Mr. Fielding?
That's right, I say, shaking her hand cordially. You must be Felicity McGovern.
That's me, she says, giving me a watery smile.
Come in, I say, guiding her into my kitchen and offering her a seat around the breakfast nook area.
She sits down thankfully. It's awfully good of you to see me. I'm so grateful. Others might not have been quite so kind. I know it can't be easy for you.
It's only a pleasure, Mrs. McGovern. Anything I can do to help, it's a pleasure.
Call me Felicity.
Well, Felicity, I can only hope I can offer you some comfort, but all I can say is I'm not sure that I actually can.
Oh, believe me, Mr. Fielding, just seeing me is offering me great comfort. I was so worried you were going to turn me down. I wouldn't have blamed you if you had. I know it can't be easy for you, having my daughter flinging herself at your truck, or having to witness that grisly scene firsthand. I can only apologize for my daughter, afflicting that horror on you. If she was here, I'm sure she'd do the same. Apologize, I mean. The last thing she'd have ever wanted to was to cause you distress.
Call me Marcus, I say.
First of all, I'd like to... Don't say it. Please don't say it. You really don't need to. It's not necessary.
But I do. I'm very sorry about your daughter's demise. I really am. I wish you were visiting me under better circumstances. I really do.
Under different circumstances, it's very unlikely we would have ever met or even crossed paths. Funny how bizarre situations in life can bring people together like this. Did she suffer? My daughter, I mean. Did she cry out? Did she look anguished when you saw her? I pause for a moment. I decide I'm going to tell this woman everything I know. She deserves the truth. Besides, I know I can trust her.
Well, I was driving on that road in the middle of the night. It was tenebrous. Your daughter just ran towards my truck. It was like she wanted to be run over. It was peculiarly bizarre, I thought. Everything happened so quickly. I was trying desperately to stop in time, but I was going faster than I ought. I was revving up my engine, you see. But even if I had been going slower, your daughter would still have been run over. She was dead set on being mown down. I remember she looked so apologetic for a brief moment when she caught my eye, as if she was saying sorry. I don't mean to do this to you.
That's my daughter for you. That's why she left a suicide note. She wanted to make certain whoever ran her over was not incriminated from her death by being falsely accused of reckless driving or something. I found her suicide note in her sock drawer. I mean, what is she like? This isn't the first time she attempted suicide. I suppose deep down in my heart, I knew she'd try again. I knew she wouldn't give up.
So I gather the officer was telling me so.
The main question I need to ask you is, did she suffer?
I don't think so, ma'am. It was over so quick for her. I doubt she felt a single thing.
Good. That's what the coroner told me. But you know, that's the coroner. I mean, am I supposed to really believe her? That's why I had to ask you. You were the one that was driving there in that treacherous spot in the middle of the night. But why were you? Or am I interfering? Tell me to mind my own business, if I am.
I was trying to end my life, Felicity. I don't know why I'm telling you this, but inadvertently your daughter stopped me from going over the edge. I was forced to slow down because of her.
Mrs. McGovern looks at me nonplussed. You thought you couldn't give me comfort. The fact that you're still here now, as a result of my daughter, brings me great comfort. You know how thrilled she would be to know that in her death, she actually saved a life? I mean, what are the chances of that happening? Why were you trying to kill yourself? What was so bad you wanted to end it all? I need to know. I hope I'm not being presumptuous to ask you, but you've been so forthcoming to me. I don't believe many people would care to admit what you've just told me. Your honesty, it's very refreshing and very much appreciated, especially for a woman like myself that is stumbling around in the darkness, trying to make sense of everything. It's like trying to put all the pieces together of a very warped jigsaw puzzle, and some of the pieces just don't fit. I sigh. Very well, I will tell you. Why did I want to end it all? Good question. I don't pretend to know all the answers to it. Life, really, I suppose. The unfairness of it all. It grieves my heart greatly when I see how many people have it so good. Others have it so bad. It seems so morally wrong, so reprehensible to me. I see this in the lives of my very own children, you know. One who sails through life, the other who struggles with everything he does. Then there's my wife, my very best friend Crystal, who I betrayed one night after a drunken binge and woke up in another woman's bed. And every time I look at my wife, I am racked with guilt. It is very difficult to live with myself. I know my family would be a lot better off without me. That's the truth. I think over the last few months, I reached rock bottom. I never knew it was possible to feel so desolate, so isolated, so alone,
So unbelievably hopeless. So filled with despair.
Oh, believe me, your family won't be better without you, Mr. Fielding. I can promise you that. Look at me. Do you think I'm better off without my daughter? Absolutely not. You know, you're just like my daughter. You're a sensitive soul. Sometimes it's the souls like yours that find life too hard to stomach. You're a good man who made a mistake, and you can't forgive yourself for that mistake. It's eating you alive. I don't know if you've seen ants eating an insect, ravaging it to pieces. Carpenter ants, I believe they're called. They can be so vicious, so callous. But that's what you're doing to yourself. You're eating yourself alive with your guilt. No wonder you're so miserable. No wonder your life has lost its sparkle and lacks meaning. I see that you're a man of remarkable integrity, which is a rare quality these days to find in people. If I was giving you any advice, I would beg you to seek some help. People are often afraid to ask for help, but your desire to kill yourself is not normal. My daughter was like you. She found life preposterously unfair. She hated that with a passion. It caused her to sink into a very deep depression. She felt she could never right the wrongs in this world. I told her it was enough to make a small difference in this life, and she could play her part in making the world a better place. But she didn't see it that way. She said life was a struggle, and she couldn't face it a moment longer. She was diagnosed with depression, but despite medication, she remained so unhappy. It was all too much for her to bear. The very nice officer, what's his name?
You mean Officer Balotelli?
That's right, that's his name, Officer Balotelli. Very considerate man. He was generous in giving me all the details. Some police officers would not have been so magnanimous with the truth, but he was brilliant. I gather my daughter had tried to get herself run over twice in one evening. The first time she wasn't so lucky. I gather Officer Balotelli claims a man in a Bigfoot suit rescued my daughter the first time. She lowers her voice to a whisper. I didn't correct him about that, but let's just say that was no man in a Bigfoot suit. That was the real deal.
Oh, I know that was a Bigfoot, Felicity, because I saw him myself, hovering over your daughter's body. He was completely devastated she was gone.
Fancy that, Mr. Fielding. You see, Mr. Dorr, the world is a beautiful place when an unlikely creature like that belongs to the pages of pulp fiction serendipitously comes to your rescue. My daughter admitted to me that she'd tried to throw herself on that very same road 3 months earlier. She confessed to me that a very irritating Bigfoot kept dragging her away from the danger, telling her over and over again in her head that she didn't have a right to take her life, that it was a gift of God. She described the creature as beautiful, a kindly soul. Of course, I got my daughter help, but despite everything, she clandestinely slipped out of the house in the middle of the night and stubbornly went back to the same stretch of road, hoping that this time she'd get to meet her maker, and hoping that this time she wouldn't get to see that Bigfoot again. If you can do anything for me, Mr. Torrentino, before you decide to kill yourself, please engage in some counselling sessions first. Visit your doctor for meds, but don't go killing yourself. Our world is crying out for sensitive souls like yourself that make it a much better place. To cut a long story short, I took Felicity McGovern's advice, along with the Bigfoots, and let's just say I'm very grateful to the young woman who ran across my path that night. For although she died, she enabled another person to live. That person is me. I have now overcome my depression, and me and my wife and family have never been happier. I have found my healing. That Bigfoot was absolutely right. Our lives are a precious gift. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.